I had been dead for less than an hour, alive in this body for 10 minutes. And someone had already told me I would not survive the week. No offense, said the goblin across from me. Copper goggles sat above one torn ear. You look easy to kill. He was right. My new name was Kale Varen. I had ash-white hair, amber eyes, thin wrists, and a human body in a world where ordinary orcs looked strong enough to break me in half. The wagon stopped. 40 exiles were dumped into a dead valley with 3 rotten huts, a collapsed well, and 2 sacks of grain. The guards left. Rain started. Then, pale letters appeared. Unclaimed territory detected. Restore 1 functional shelter to establish control. Building rank upgrade will unlock after territory recognition. I stared at the nearest broken hut. "A roof?" I said to the goblin. "Can you build one?" His eyes widened. "I can build 3. Kale stepped into the mud beside the goblin before the rain could turn the clearing into a swamp. His boots leaked. His ribs hurt when he breathed deeply, and the memories attached to his new body came in broken pieces. The previous Kale had been 23, a human laborer in a southern market town, too weak for quarry work, and too poor to pay a food debt. A labor gang bought him, worked him through a fever, and threw him into the exile wagon when he collapsed. The fever had broken sometime during the night, leaving the body shaky and dehydrated rather than actively dying. The mind now using that body belonged to a man who had coordinated warehouse crews, truck schedules, loading bays, and emergency deliveries in another world. A delivery van had ended that life at an intersection. He had never commanded soldiers or designed fortresses. He did understand what happened when food, workers, tools, and transport reached the wrong place at the wrong time. The other exiles were already separating into groups. 2 young orcs moved toward the grain sacks. A broad-shouldered boar beastman followed them. Older creatures backed away. Kale saw the shape of the problem before anyone spoke. 40 frightened people, enough food for perhaps 4 days, no authority, and a social order in which the strongest expected to decide who ate. The old orc from the wagon rose slowly. He was huge, even with one knee stiff from an old injury. His skin was gray-green. His hair was braided with iron rings, and the left tusk had broken close to his lip. A pale scar crossed his right brow. One of the younger orcs reached for a grain sack. The old one caught his wrist. "Leave it." The younger orc bared his teeth. "You are limping, Gorun." "I am." Gorun twisted once. The younger orc dropped to one knee with a grunt. "My hands are fine." That prevented a fight, but it did not solve the food problem. Several exiles were already discussing leaving the valley. A lynx beast woman with black ear tufts and a dark red braid watched the tree line. Her green eyes never stayed in one place for long. Kale approached the goblin from the wagon. "Your name?" "Nib. Builder, roof fixer, bridge repairer, chimney expert, occasional genius." "Can one of those be repaired before dark?" Nib pushed the copper goggles over his eyes. The lenses made them look enormous. He walked around the closest hut, kicked a post, ducked when a rotten board fell, and came back wearing the expression of a doctor about to deliver bad news. "Yes." Kale waited. Nib held up a finger. "If we have 6 workers, rope, 2 straight trees, dry thatch, and nobody asks me to make it pretty, I can promise the last one." The system message still floated at the edge of Kale's vision. When he focused on the hut, new information appeared. Ruined shelter. Structural completion, 31%. Required for functional status. Stable walls, sealed roof, hearth, dry sleeping area. That was useful. It was also very different from free magic. Kale walked toward the center of the group and raised his voice. "The rain gets worse tonight. Anyone who wants to sleep dry, help me fix that house." One of the young orcs laughed. "You?" Kale looked at the timber lying beside the hut. It was thicker than his thigh. "No, you are going to carry the heavy things. Nib is going to tell you where." The orc blinked. Kale pointed toward the lynx woman. "You know the forest?" She studied him before answering. "Better than you." "Good, we need straight saplings and dry brush. Nothing that gets us eaten." Sarah, she said. Kale. She gave him a short nod and disappeared toward the trees with 2 other beast folk. Goran was watching him. Everything I can lift. Everything else? I organize. Gorun's mouth twitched around the broken tusk. At least you know the difference. 6 people became 10 when a rain thickened. 10 became 20 when Sarah returned with poles and reported that the clouds over the western ridge were nearly black. Nib took control of the actual construction. The goblin's nervous energy vanished as soon as someone put a hammer in his hand. He shouted measurements, climbed the walls like a green spider, and slapped an orc's fingers away when the man tried to set a roof beam in the wrong notch. Strength does not make the beam straighter, Nib snapped. The orc stared at him. Nib immediately stepped behind Goran. I stand by the engineering principle. Kale spent the next hours moving rope, sorting usable boards, carrying buckets of mud, and keeping people from drifting away to argue over food. He asked who could cut timber, who could tie knots, who had experience with hearths. Every answer changed the work plan. By sunset, his arms shook from tasks that would have been trivial in his old body. The hut still looked terrible. It also had 4 standing walls, a patched roof, a clay-lined hearth, and a raised sleeping platform covered with dry grass. The moment Nib fitted the last shutter, pale text appeared. Functional shelter established. Territory control recognized. Area under practical control, 0.04 square kilometers. Ruler system activated. Available function, building rank upgrade. Shelter rank, crude. Upgrade requirement, structure functional, 5 residents assigned, basic maintenance tools present. Upgrade cost, 2 territory points. Current territory points, 3. Kale stared at the last line. He focused on territory points and received a short explanation. The first 3 points were a one-time founding grant. After that, points came only when a functioning settlement solved a permanent civic need, such as shelter, water, food storage, defense, production, sanitation, or transportation. Building 10 empty sheds would earn nothing. Upgrade costs also rose with the size and rank of a structure. The system rendered measurements in units Kale understood. The people around him still spoke in paces, wagon loads, and days of travel, but the pale text translated distance, weight, and area into familiar numbers. That gave Kale something he could plan around. 5 people need to be assigned here, Kale said. Nib looked up from the hearth. Because I think I can improve it. Goran folded his arms. With what? Kale had no good answer. Something I received when I woke here. The room went quiet. Personal magic, racial gifts, and enchanted tools were common enough that nobody screamed. Trained spellcasters were another matter. Border settlements might know a hedge healer or someone who could light a flame with mana, while battle mages usually served rich courts or major cities. Whatever Kale had received looked rare, but not impossible enough to make the exiles run. Kale pointed at 5 of the oldest exiles. Sleep here tonight. If nothing happens, you still have the best roof. That argument worked. The system accepted the assignments. Kale selected upgrade. There was no flash of lightning. The hut did not transform into a palace. Instead, the timbers shifted with a series of soft wooden knocks. Gaps tightened. Warped boards straightened. Mud plaster spread smoothly across cracks. The roof settled into a better angle. The hearthstones locked together. Cold air stopped slipping through the walls. Current territory points, 1. Nib slowly removed his goggles. He walked to a corner they had patched 3 times and pressed both hands against it. That was crooked. It is not crooked. I also noticed that. Nib turned to him with offended fascination. Do it again. It cost something. Do it again later. That night, the western storm hit. Rain hammered the roof so loudly that conversation became difficult. Wind bent the dead grass nearly flat. The 20 exiles who had refused to work stood outside for less than 5 minutes before abandoning their dignity and asking to come in. The upgraded hut held them all, barely. Goran ended up sitting against the wall with 3 goblin children sleeping across one thigh. Sarah took a beam above the hearth and somehow slept there without falling. Nib claimed a shelf. Kale found half a sleeping mat near the door. He woke sometime before dawn because his right leg had gone numb. Gorun's head was resting on it. Kale stared at the 200-kilogram orc. Gorun. No response. Gorun. My leg. The orc opened one eye. Warm. That is not an explanation. It is a reason. Kale spent the rest of the night sitting upright. At dawn, the storm passed. The upgraded house stood in a field of mud, while one of the other huts had lost half its roof. People emerged slowly. They looked at the repaired shelter, then at Kale. Nobody laughed when he said they would build 3 more. The first problem appeared before breakfast. Sarah returned from the well with a bucket of brown water and dropped it at Kale's feet. We have maybe a day before someone gets sick. Kale looked toward the collapsed stone ring in the center of the old settlement. The system displayed a new civic need. Reliable water supply? Unmet. Potential territory point reward? 4. Kale rubbed his aching leg and stood. Then the houses wait. We fixed the well. The well had failed for a simple reason. Its upper wall had collapsed into the shaft years ago, and every storm washed soil, insects, and dead leaves into the water below. Simple did not mean easy. Nib inspected the stones while tied to a rope around the waist. Gurren and 2 other orcs held the line. Kale knelt at the edge and watched the goblin descend until only the orange scarf around his neck remained visible in the gloom. Bottom is still wet, Nib called. There is flow through the rock. Good flow, bad everything else. He climbed back with mud up to his elbows and a dead beetle stuck to one goggle. Sarah looked into the bucket they had pulled up. We could boil it. For 40 people, Kale said. Every day. With firewood we also need for heat. She gave a small shrug. Then we repair it. That answer became the pattern of the next 2 days. The settlement could not afford elegant solutions. It needed permanent ones. Nib designed a new stone collar for the shaft and a raised wooden cover. Kale divided the workers into teams. Gorun managed the heavy lifting. Sarah took hunters into the forest and returned with 3 long-eared animals that looked like rabbits, designed by someone who had been angry at rabbits. Their front teeth were long enough to cut leather. Kale learned not to ask whether things were edible until after Sarah had killed them. The well became functional near sunset on the second day. Clean water rose in the first bucket. The system recognized the civic need. Reliable water supply established. Territory points gained, 4. Well rank, crude. Upgrade available. Kale spent 2 points. The improvement deepened the fitted stone lining, tightened the cover, straightened the lifting frame, and formed a proper drainage slope around the mouth. Water still had to be pulled by hand. Nid's competent repair had simply become a much better version of the same repair. 3 territory points remained. Kale liked the rule. Skill and labor had to come first. The system multiplied results that already worked. By the end of the first week, the 40 exiles had 6 functional shelters, a reliable well, a roofed grain store, 2 cook fires, and the beginning of a schedule. Kale's fever weakness had eased by then. His ribs still hurt, and Goran or Nib regularly took heavy loads out of his hands before he could pretend otherwise. The schedule caused more arguments than the building. One young orc named Boro objected to being assigned kitchen work. I can carry twice what Nib carries. Nib looked offended. Most furniture can carry twice what I carry. Boro ignored him. I should be on the wall. Kale had watched Boro cut the first butchered animal. The orc had separated joints cleanly, saved every strip of usable fat, and somehow turned the tough meat into a stew that made 30 people stop talking while they ate. You were a cook before you were exiled, Kale said. Boro's heavy jaw tightened. Goran glanced over. His warband mocked him for it. Then his warband was stupid. Boro looked at Kale as if the human had spoken in an unknown language. Kale pointed toward the cook fire. If we put you on a wall, you are one large fighter. If we put you in charge of food, 40 people work better. I need the second thing more. Boro stared for another second, then returned to the pot. That evening, he added wild onion to the stew and pretended It had nothing to do with the conversation. Kale started asking everyone the same question. What can you do well? The answers were rarely what the world had valued. An elderly mole beastman knew how to cut drainage channels. A goblin widow could sew leather. A half-blind lizard man had spent 30 years repairing cartwheels. 2 young orcs knew nothing except fighting. So, Gorun began teaching them how to stand guard without falling asleep. The camp became less chaotic. Then, Sarah found tracks. She returned near noon on the 8th day and crouched beside Kale's rough map, scratched onto a plank. Ridge, hounds. 7, maybe 9. Kale had not seen one. Sarah drew a shape with 1 claw, big shoulders, low body. They hunt in groups. They test the edge of camps at night. Gorun asked how close. Close enough that I smelled one before I saw the print. The partially rebuilt fence suddenly mattered much more. Kale focused on the settlement boundary. The system showed practical control, extending only around the cluster of occupied buildings and the well. The old fence was useless. Half the posts had rotted at ground level. Defense remained an unmet civic need. Nib estimated 2 days for a proper wooden palisade around the entire camp. Sarah said they might have 1 night. Kale changed the goal. We do not need a proper wall by sunset. We need a closed wall. Nib's face twisted. Those are different things. Use the old posts where they still stand. Fill gaps with wagons, stacked timber, thorn brush, anything a hound cannot cross at speed. Tomorrow, we rebuild it correctly. The goblin thought about that, then nodded. Everyone worked. The remaining grain sacks moved into the roofed storehouse. Children and the least mobile elders carried branches. The strong workers dragged intact sections of old fence upright. Sarah marked the likely approaches from the forest. Gorun chose the best fighters and placed them where the line was weakest. Kale spent most of the afternoon running from one point to another. At the northern side, he found 3 orcs wasting time trying to set a heavy gate between warped posts. Leave it. One frowned. Then, how do we close the entrance? Kale pointed to a rotting freight cart that had been found behind a ruined storehouse, with 1 broken wheel. Turn that sideways. Brace it. We need it to last 1 night, not impress a carpenter. Nib, standing on a ladder nearby, shouted, Do not tell anyone I approve that. Did you approve it? I hate it already. The temporary barrier closed shortly before dusk. The system did not count it as a proper palisade. Kale had expected that. It did, however, recognize a defended camp boundary. Temporary defensive perimeter established. Territory point reward reduced due to non-permanent construction. Points gained 1. Current territory points 4. Kale almost laughed. Even the system disliked Nib's ugly fence. Nobody complained about Boros' stew. The Ridgehounds came 2 hours later. The first warning was not a howl. It was the sharp rattle of pebbles on the western slope. Sarah raised 2 fingers from her position on the roof of the storehouse. Everyone went still. Kale stood behind the central barricade with a short hunting spear someone had given him. He knew how absurd it was. If a ridge hound reached him, the spear would only make the situation slightly more complicated for the hound. Gurren noticed the way he held it. You have never used one. I had guessed that was obvious. Keep the point toward what wants to eat you. Excellent. I am trained. Goran snorted. A shape moved beyond the torchlight. Then another. The hounds were larger than Kale expected, nearly chest-high on all 4s. Their backs were covered with rough plates of dark bone, and their jaws opened too wide for their narrow skulls. One rushed the southern fence. It did not leap immediately. It stopped, paced, then snapped at the thorn brush. Another moved the opposite direction. Sarah had been right. They were testing. Kale watched the shadows rather than the nearest beast. They are looking for a weak point. Gorun nodded. They always do. That gave Kale an idea he did not like. Then we give them one. Goran turned his head. Kale pointed toward the north entrance. The freight cart blocked most of it, but a narrow gap remained between the wheel and the old post. Pull some thorn brush away from there. Make it look unfinished. That brings them toward the houses. It brings them toward you. Gurun grinned around the broken tusk. Better. The defenders quietly shifted. 4 spear users moved behind the cart. 2 archers climbed onto the nearest roof. Sarah disappeared into the darkness on the wall side. They removed enough brush to make the gap visible. It took less than a minute. A ridgehound saw it and charged. The creature lowered its plated head and smashed through the loose branches. Its shoulders caught between the cart and post for half a heartbeat. Goran drove his spear beneath its jaw. The hound convulsed, tore free, and nearly dragged the orc forward. 2 more spears struck from the sides. The other hounds rushed at once. The fight became loud and confused. One animal hit the western fence hard enough to crack a post. Another climbed halfway over stacked timber before Boro, still wearing his cooking apron, buried a wood axe in its foreleg. Kale saw the northern post bend. "Back from the cart," he shouted. Goran heard him. 2 defenders did not. The second hound slammed into the first one's body. The broken wheel shifted, and the heavy cart rolled inward. One young orc fell under its edge. Kale ran toward him before he had time to think about whether that was brave or stupid. He dropped the spear, grabbed the orc under one arm, and pulled. The body barely moved. Then Nib appeared beside him, seized the other arm, and yelled for help. Together with a lizard man, they dragged the orc clear just before the cart settled into the mud. A ridgehound came through the opening. Kale saw teeth and smelled rotten meat. Sarah dropped from the fence above it. Her spear entered behind the creature's shoulder. She used her full weight, twisted, and rolled away as it snapped at empty air. Goran finished it with one heavy blow. Kale remained on the ground for a moment, hands buried in mud. Sarah looked at him. "Keep the point toward what wants to eat you." Kale blinked. From behind her, Goran barked a laugh. The remaining hounds broke after losing 4 animals. They vanished into the dark. No Exiled died. The orc caught beneath the cart had a fractured ankle and several ugly bruises, but he would live. At sunrise, Kale walked the damaged fence with Nib. The goblin kicked the freight cart. "I still hate it." "For one night, then today we build something you like." Nib pushed his goggles up. "That will take longer. Good things usually do." 3 days later, the last proper palisade post locked into place. The system recognized permanent defense. Defensive perimeter established. Territory points gained, 5. Palisade rank, crude. Upgrade cost, 3 territory points. Kale upgraded it. The post settled deeper and straighter. Cross braces strengthened. The watch platforms became stable enough to hold several people without shaking. Current territory points, 6. The camp had survived a storm and a predator attack. It now had water, food storage, shelters, and a real boundary. That evening, Gorun found a mark carved into one of the old gate stones. It looked like a tusked skull beneath 3 slashes. His expression changed. Kale noticed. "What is it?" "Dargon's mark." Goran looked toward the road leading south. "The orc who thinks this valley belongs to him." Kale leaned against the strengthened gate. "Does it? No one lived here long enough to argue." "That was not my question." Gorun studied him, then smiled faintly. "You are going to be troublesome, human. I have been told worse." Over the next 9 days, 6 solitary stragglers reached the valley from failed camps and roadside work gangs. They brought almost no food, but 1 new leather repair, 2 new charcoal burning, and the others could work timber or fields. Kale accepted them after checking that the settlement could stretch its rations. The population reached 46. The trouble arrived on the 9th day. Sarah spotted 6 riders before noon. They came on broad-horned animals and carried Dargon's tusked skull banner. The leader was a red-skinned orc with bronze rings around both tusks and a leather coat reinforced with metal squares. His name, Goran said, was Rusk. He collected tribute from the weak settlements on Dargon's border. Rusk stopped in front of the gate and looked up at the new palisade. His eyebrows rose. This place was empty. Gorun stood on the platform. It was. Rusk's gaze moved past him and landed on Kale. "Who owns it now?" Kale walked forward. Rusk looked behind him. "The owner." You are looking at him. The riders laughed. Rusk dismounted. He was nearly twice Kale's width and a head taller. When he approached, Kale could see old scars across the orc's forearms. Human, I am trying to be polite. Bring out whoever commands you. Goran rested both forearms on the railing above. He does. The laughter stopped. Rusk's expression became interested, rather than angry. He walked slowly around Kale, taking in the ash-white hair, thin shoulders, and patched coat. Dargan's law is simple. Settlements inside his protection give half their grain after harvest, 1/4 of hunted meat, and workers when called. Since you are new, I will take only what you have now. 2 grain sacks, 5 laborers for the quarry. Kale had already counted the supplies. Giving away 2 grain sacks would cut their reserve almost in half. 5 laborers represented more than 10% of the adult workforce. No. Rusk looked at him. Kale continued. If we give you that, people go hungry. The laborers are needed here. One rider chuckled. Rusk did not. You misunderstand what tribute is. I understand it. I am refusing. The air near the gate seemed to tighten. Goran shifted his weight above them. Sarah had appeared on the opposite platform with a bow in hand. Rusk studied the wall, the defenders, and the settlement behind them. He could probably take the grain with 6 riders. He could not do it cleanly. Dargan will hear about this. He should. Rusk's eyes narrowed. Kale added, Tell him I am willing to discuss trade. I am not willing to starve my settlement for the privilege of saying he protects us. Rusk smiled then, and it was not friendly. You have 5 days. When I return, bring the grain and workers outside the gate. If I have to enter, I take more. He mounted and rode south. Nib climbed down from the wall after the riders disappeared. Did you have a plan before you said no? Yes. A complete plan? Kale looked toward the half-repaired houses, wooden wall, and 46 residents. I had the beginning of one. Nib made a small, distressed sound. Goran came through the gate. Dargan has more than 200 fighters he can call quickly. More, if he empties the villages. Kale nodded. Rusk will not bring all of them in 5 days. Probably not. How many? 20, maybe 30. Enough to make an example. Kale looked at the palisade. Against ridgehounds, it was excellent. Against 30 angry orcs, it was a fence. He turned to Sarah. You mentioned stone ruins north of here. An old quarry. How far? Half a day. Dangerous? Sarah's ears angled outward. You always ask that, after deciding to go. It saves time. There is an iron-backed boar nesting there. Goran's face tightened. Kale asked, How bad? Bad enough that your spear advice will not help. Kale picked up the rough map. Then we bring people who know what they are doing. The quarry sat between 2 low ridges, where gray stone broke through the soil like exposed bone. Kale brought 12 people. Goran chose 4 fighters. Sarah brought 2 hunters. Nib came because nobody else could judge whether the old cutstone was usable. 3 laborers carried rope and tools. Boro came with food and a wood axe that he insisted was not a weapon until someone pointed out the dried hound blood still on the blade. Kitchen emergency, he said. They left before sunrise. The valley beyond the palisade looked different once Kale understood how much of it could kill him. Sarah moved ahead in short bursts, pausing to examine broken grass or a mark on bark. Goran walked at Kale's side because his bad knee made scouting impractical, and because, as he put it, somebody had to prevent the ruler from being eaten by a rabbit. Kale reminded him about Sarah's long-toothed prey from the previous week. Those rabbits deserve respect. You deserve thicker boots. The quarry appeared before noon. Someone had worked it on a serious scale once. 3 stepped levels had been cut into the hill. Squared blocks lay beneath weeds. An old lifting frame had collapsed beside a shallow pit filled with rainwater. Nib forgot the danger for nearly a full minute. He ran to a stack of blocks, scraped moss away, and made an excited noise. Good stone. Very good stone. Dense, fine grain. The old idiots even left half of it cut, Sarah hissed from the upper path. Everyone stopped, The ironback boar emerged from behind a fallen slab. Kale had expected something the size of a large farm animal. It was closer to a small wagon. Its shoulders stood above Goran's chest. Overlapping great plates covered its back and sides. Two curved tusks projected from a scarred snout, each nearly as long as Kale's arm. One eye was cloudy, the other fixed on the intruders. Nib slowly moved behind the nearest stone block. I would like to revise my assessment. The quarry is slightly occupied. Goran lowered his spear. Do not run downhill. Kale asked why. It runs faster downhill. Good information to have now. The boar charged. Goran and the fighters scattered behind stone piles exactly as Sarah had instructed before they entered. The animal hit the place where Gorun had stood and drove one tusk deep into an abandoned timber. Two spears struck its side. Both glanced from the plates. The boar ripped free and swung its head. A young orc was thrown across the quarry and hit the ground hard. Sarah's arrow struck near the creature's good eye. It turned toward her. Eye and belly, Gorun shouted. Nothing else matters. The boar charged the slope. Sarah ran across the upper ledge with the creature beneath her. It could not climb directly, so it followed the winding quarry road. Kale watched the path. 3 old cut blocks rested near the upper edge. Weeds had grown around the chalks beneath them. Nib, were those meant to move? The goblin glanced at them. Originally, with enough force, Kale pointed at the old lifting frame. Rope. Nib understood before he finished the word. The laborers ran. They looped their longest rope around the lowest block and fed it through an iron ring still embedded in the quarry wall. The block weighed several tons. Pulling it directly was useless, but they did not need to lift it. They needed to remove what stopped gravity from doing the work. Sarah, Kale shouted, bring it below the blocks. She looked once, saw the rope, and changed direction. Gorun and 2 fighters harried its rear from a safe distance. A spear point found the softer skin near one hind leg. The boar spun, forcing them back, then saw Sarah moving above and charged again. Nib crawled toward the wooden chalk under the first stone. Kale grabbed his orange scarf and pulled him back. Use the rope. The chalk is stuck. Then tie the rope to the chalk. Nib stared at him, then slapped his own forehead. They looped a second line around the old wedge. It did not move. The boar was almost beneath them. Kale wrapped the rope once around a standing stone post and shouted for Goran. The old orc limped over, seized the free end, and leaned backward with his full weight. Wood groaned. The wedge shifted 2 fingers. Nib shouted. Again. The boar reached the curve beneath Sarah. Goran pulled. The wedge tore free. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the block moved. It slid forward with a sound like stone grinding its teeth. The second block beside it shifted. Dirt and pebbles poured from beneath both. Sarah jumped from the road onto a narrow shelf. The boar looked up. 2 blocks, each heavier than the animal, came down the quarry slope. The first struck its shoulder and knocked it sideways. The second hit the rear plates and pinned it against the cut wall. The creature screamed and thrashed. 1 block cracked. It was still alive. Goran approached from the front, careful of the tusks. The boar's good eye followed him. Sarah put an arrow into that eye from above. The animal jerked. Gorun drove his remaining spear through the open mouth and into the throat. The quarry became silent, except for everyone's breathing. Kale sat on a stone because his knees had begun to shake after the danger passed. Goran wiped blood from his spear. You did not use your weapon. Kale looked at the short spear still strapped to his pack. I moved a rock. A large rock. I had help. Gorun nodded once. That is becoming your favorite kind of weapon. The injured young orc had cracked ribs, but could walk with support. Sarah skinned usable sections from the boar, while Boro looked at the amount of meat and forgot his fear completely. We need a bigger pot, he said. They returned the next day with 2 wagons and more workers. The system recognized the quarry. Only after Kale had marked a safe work area, assigned laborers, repaired the access path, and established regular transport back to the settlement. Stone supply established. Territory points gained, 4. Kale left the quarry at its working rank. He spent 4 points instead, 2 on the gate and 1 on each of the 2 watch platforms. 6 territory points remained. Nib used the cut stone to build short foundations under the most vulnerable sections of Palisade. 5 days allowed only targeted work, so they concentrated stone and labor around the entrance and the weakest wall sections. The old freight cart disappeared from the defensive plan. Nib celebrated this as a personal victory. The settlement also changed its layout. Kale had the grain store move farther from the gate. A narrow inner barrier divided the first row of buildings from the homes. 2 lanes beside the entrance remained deliberately clear. Gorun understood why. If they break through, they enter a box, a street, a box with a polite name. They prepared buckets of sand, not boiling oil. Oil was valuable food. Kale refused to pour dinner over anyone, unless they were very desperate. Rusk returned on the 5th morning with 24 fighters. This time, none of them laughed. He stopped outside bow range and examined the stronger gate, stone footings, and watch platforms. You worked quickly. Kale stood behind the closed gate with Goran. We had a deadline. Rusk raised his voice. Bring the tribute. I told you the answer. Then hear mine. Dargan will own this place before winter. I can make today easy. Kale looked at the fighters behind him. Some were nervous. 2 had never fought anything more intelligent than a ridgehound. The settlement had 49 residents now, after 3 wanderers joined. Losing even 5 adults would hurt badly. He did not want this fight. He also understood what happened if he opened the gate. Trade is still available, Kale said. Tribute is not. Rusk sighed. Break it. The orcs advanced with 2 long logs carried between them. They did not run stupidly into arrows. Rusk sent shield bearers first. Others held thick hide screens overhead. The defenders' first arrows struck shields, or buried themselves in leather. Goran watched from the platform. He has done this before. Kale nodded. So we make him do something different. The first log hit the gate. The impact shuddered through the frame. Nib, standing below with tools in hand, flinched as if someone had punched him personally. Again, Rusk called. The second impact cracked one surface board. The upgraded frame held. Kale waited. He had placed only 4 visible archers on the front platforms. Rusk had noticed. His shield line concentrated on the gate. Kale raised one hand. Sarah whistled from the roof of the storehouse behind the inner barrier. 6 hunters stood with her. They did not shoot at the shield bearers. They shot over them, down the clear lanes Kale had ordered left open, targeting the orcs carrying the ram from the side. 2 dropped immediately. The others stumbled and lost rhythm. Rusk shouted for half his men to push toward the southern wall. That was what Kale expected. The wall there looked weaker, because several old posts remained visible. Behind it, however, Nib had laid a second row of angled stakes braced against buried stones. The attackers hit the first line with axes. They chopped through one post. The fence sagged. An orc rushed the gap and met Goran's spear from the other side. The point struck his shield, but Goran used the impact to shove him backward into the next man. 2 defenders thrust through the opening. The orcs pulled away. Rusk changed tactics again. Fire. Kale's stomach tightened. 3 attackers lit bundles of dry grass and pushed them toward the palisade with long forks. They had prepared for this, but preparation did not make fire harmless. The first bundle landed against a post. Flames climbed rapidly. Kale shouted for the bucket line. Children and elders at the well passed water forward. Boro and 2 lizard men dumped soaked hides over the burning section. Steam filled the air. A second fire caught farther north. The defenders there were slower. Flames spread along the dry, upper rail. Nib ran toward it. Kale caught his arm. You are not a firefighter. That is my wall. Then tell them what to cut. Nib froze, then pointed. That cross brace. Remove it before the fire reaches the next section. 2 orcs hacked through the brace and pulled the burning rail inward. The fire dropped into bare mud, where it could be smothered. The attackers had forced the defenders to split their attention. Rusk saw it and led 6 fighters at the gate himself. The ram hit again. A hinge bolt bent. Nib shouted a word Kale did not need translated. Kale looked at Goran. Open the inner barrier. Goran understood. You want them inside. A few. How many is a few? Fewer than all of them. Goran grinned. The next strike broke the outer hinge. The gate leaned inward. Rusk roared, and his men pushed through. The defenders gave ground exactly as ordered. Rusk entered with 7 fighters, and saw an apparently open lane toward the storehouse. Then Nib cut a rope. A pre-built timber gate dropped across the breach behind them. The barrier would last only a short time. That was enough to separate the first 8 attackers from everyone outside. Kale stood behind the inner barrier with Gorun and 12 defenders. This is the box, Gorun said. Straight. Very polite box. Rusk reacted quickly. He did not panic. He ordered his men into a shield circle and began pushing toward the weakest corner rather than charging Kale. That almost worked. The defenders threw stones and fired arrows from the elevated platforms. Rusk's shield took 2 hits. Another orc reached the inner barrier and nearly climbed over before Boros struck his fingers with the flat side of an axe. Outside, the trapped force was already chopping through Nib's temporary gate. Kale had perhaps a minute. Push them away from the north side. The old orc led 4 shield bearers forward. They did not try to kill Rusk. They drove into the formation and forced it south, where Sarah's hunters had a clearer angle from the storehouse roof. He abandoned the push and shouted surrender before the first arrow flew. The word surprised everyone. Gurun stopped his spear, a handspan from an orc's throat. Rusk lowered his weapon. You have us inside. My men outside cannot break through before you kill us. If I die, Dargan comes with 100. If I live, he probably comes with 100 anyway. I prefer living. Drop the weapons. They did. The outer attackers retreated when they saw Rusk captive. The battle had lasted less than 20 minutes. 3 defenders were injured. 1 had a deep cut in the shoulder. 2 attackers had died. 5 were wounded, and 8 were prisoners. Kale disliked the numbers. He also knew they were far better than what would have happened in an open field. Rusk sat against the inner wall, with 1 boot beside a dark smear of blood on Nib's new timber. Kale brought him water. Rusk stared at the cup. You are releasing us, aren't you? After your wounded can travel. Why? Because feeding 8 prisoners all winter is expensive. Rusk laughed so hard his injured ribs hurt. Kale waited, then added, and because I want you to carry a message. There it is. Tell Dargan we will trade with him. We will sign a border agreement. We will not pay tribute, and we will not send him workers. Rusk drank. He will think you insulted him. I refused to starve on command. If that insults him, we were going to have a problem eventually. He noticed the bucket teams still putting out the last smoking patch. Boro returning to his cookfire, and Nib already yelling about gate repairs. You know he has more warriors than you have people. Yes. And you are still doing this? Kale looked at the strengthened wall. I am doing this because he has more warriors than I have people. Rusk considered that answer for a long time. 2 days later, he and the surviving fighters rode south. At the gate, he turned once. Human. Kale looked up. Dargan will come, not today. Maybe not this month. He cannot let this stand. I know. Rusk nodded and rode away. Nib waited until the riders vanished. So what do we build now? Kale looked through the gate at the road south. Everything. Dargan did not come that month. Sarah's scouts and the refugees gradually explained why. Dargan's quickest fighters were scattered across harvest escorts, tribute collections, and road patrols. Pulling 200 warriors into the valley immediately would leave several other communities exposed. More importantly, he wanted Hearthvale's grain, workers, and future taxes. A burned camp full of corpses had very little value, so he chose pressure first. Collectors squeezed the surrounding camps harder, and every new mouth that fled toward Hearthvale became another mouth Kale had to feed. Dargan apparently expected hunger to accomplish what a costly assault might ruin. His absence was useful, but it was not peace. Word of Rusk's defeat traveled faster than Kale expected. The story changed with every retelling. In one version, the human ruler had trapped 50 orcs in a single house. In another, his walls moved by themselves. Someone claimed he had turned Rusk into a goat and changed him back only after the orc apologized. Kale learned about that version when the first refugees arrived. There were 11 of them. 3 goblin families from a charcoal camp west of the valley. They waited outside the gate in patched clothes, carrying everything they owned in baskets. The eldest goblin bowed so low that his forehead nearly touched the ground. "We heard the human lord accepts weak folk." Kale disliked the title immediately. He disliked the phrase weak folk more. "What happened to your camp?" The goblin explained that Dargon's tax collectors had doubled their charcoal quota after losing access to Kale's grain. The camp could either work until winter with almost no food reserve or leave. "What can you do?" Kale asked. The goblin blinked. "Do? Skills. Work. Anything useful." The old goblin glanced at his family as though he had expected questions about loyalty, strength, or tribute. "Charcoal. Tree cutting. My daughter makes soap. Her husband repairs kilns." Kale opened the gate. "Then come in. We need all 4. 11 became 27 by the end of the week. Then a limping hyena beastman arrived with his wife and 2 sons. A pair of kobold potters followed. 3 retired orc soldiers came after hearing Gorun had found work despite his ruined knee. A family of mole folk walked 2 days because the grandfather knew the valley's old drainage channels and believed a settlement might pay him for that knowledge. Kale did. The population passed 100 and nearly broke everything. The well that had easily served 40 residents developed a line from dawn until midday. Every shelter filled. Boro's cookfire became a battlefield of bowls. Waste collected behind the houses because nobody had planned where 100 creatures of different sizes would relieve themselves. Kale stood beside a ditch one morning while Nib covered his nose with his orange scarf. "We are building latrines." Nib nodded vigorously. "Far away. Downhill from the well." "Far downhill." That civic project earned no cheers, but it prevented the settlement from becoming sick. The ruler's system recognized sanitation as a permanent function. Sanitation function established. Territory points gained, 4. Kale spent 2 of the new points on the water system rather than the latrines. A second lifting frame appeared at the well. The drainage improved, and Nib built a large covered cistern nearby to hold water through busy hours. Current territory points, 8. The new residents created another change. Kale could no longer know everyone by name. He tried anyway. For nearly 3 weeks, he woke before sunrise, inspected the wall, checked the kitchen, listened to Nib's construction list, walked the grain store, met new arrivals, reviewed hunting reports with Sarah, and sat with Goran during evening guard changes. He carried a small notebook of handmade paper and wrote until his fingers cramped. Nobody told him to stop, because everyone assumed rulers were supposed to work like that. Then, a ratkin woman named Miri arrived, and ruined his method in less than an hour. She was small even beside Nib. Charcoal gray fur covered her face and hands. Round gold spectacles sat on the bridge of her narrow nose, and a blue cloth belt around her waist held a thick ledger, 3 charcoal sticks, and a knife that looked too sharp for accounting. She came through the gate with 6 other refugees from a trading post Dargon had closed. Kale asked his usual question, "What can you do?" Miri adjusted her spectacles. "Count. We all count. Poorly." She looked toward the public storehouse. "For example, you are missing approximately 11% of your dried meat." Kale stared at her. "You have been here for 12 minutes. How do you know?" Miri pointed at the storehouse door. "The inventory marks say 60 bundles went in yesterday. The rack visible through the door holds 52. The exact shortage may differ because your marking system appears to be as bad as your shelving." Niv made a wounded noise from behind Kale. "The shelves are new. Then they have achieved poor organization very efficiently." Kale hired her before lunch. The missing meat turned out not to be theft. Boro had taken 6 bundles for stew and forgotten to mark them, while 2 had spoiled because the southern wall of the storehouse trapped moisture. Miri spent the afternoon reorganizing the ledger and insulting Kale's records with increasing creativity. What is this column? Expected grain consumption. Why is there a question mark? Because I did not know how much an ogre child eats. Ask one. We did not have any when I wrote it. Miri paused. Acceptable? Question mark. Keep that one. She was the first person Kale delegated an entire civic function to. The result was immediate. Miri created ration categories based on age, species, and work. Boro complained that accounting was invading his kitchen. Miri replied that his kitchen was invading the food budget. They argued for 2 days and then produced a better meal plan together. Kale learned something important from watching them. He had been treating every problem as if it needed his hands on it. The settlement was becoming too large for that. The lesson arrived physically one evening. Kale sat in the unfinished meeting hall while Goran explained guard rotations. Sarah waited with a hunting map. Nib had 3 building requests. Miri wanted authority to set market stall fees. Boro wanted another oven. Kale leaned over the table to read a number and woke with his face on the map. His cheek was stuck to a wet patch of charcoal. Everyone else was still sitting there. Goran had moved a folded coat under Kale's head. Kale sat up slowly. How long? Sarah answered. An hour. Why did nobody wake me? Miri looked over her spectacles. Because we finished the meeting. Kale stared at them. Nib brightened. I got the bathhouse approved. You what? Goran approved it. Goran folded his arms. I was outvoted. By whom? Miri raised one paw. Sarah raised a hand. Boro, who had entered with tea, raised both. Kale rubbed charcoal from his cheek. Apparently, I have a government. Miri opened her ledger. You have 5 people doing jobs you should have assigned 2 weeks ago. Government is a generous word. Kale began formalizing responsibilities the next day. Gorun commanded the guard and training. Sarah led scouts and hunters. Nib supervised construction and maintenance. Miri controlled stores, accounts, and market rules. Boro managed communal food, and, after considerable argument, sanitation kitchens and public ovens. Kale retained final authority over territory, diplomacy, large expenditures, and system upgrades. The settlement became easier to run almost immediately. It also became more alive. A market formed near the gate. The goblin soap makers sold out every batch. Kobold potters traded cooking vessels for grain. A lizard man began repairing boots. Someone opened a tea stall using bitter leaves Sarah's hunters brought from the forest. Nib built the bathhouse. Kale had expected resistance because many residents came from camps where washing meant jumping into a river when the smell became unbearable. The first week, the bathhouse was nearly empty. The second week, Boro discovered hot soaking helped his back after hours over the oven. Goran followed. 3 weeks later, Kale found the old orc sitting outside the bathhouse 40 minutes before opening. You said it was a waste of firewood, Kale reminded him. Goran kept his eyes on the door. I was wrong. Very wrong. Nib appeared with a sign. New rule, maximum 1 hour in the hot pool. Goran slowly turned his head. Who made that rule? Nib pointed at Miri and immediately walked away. By late autumn, the original camp had become a rough town of nearly 300 residents. The transformation was obvious from the southern road. Straight rows of houses replaced the 3 ruined huts. Smoke rose from proper chimneys. The palisade surrounded a larger area now, with 4 watchtowers and stone-based gates. Drainage ditches kept the streets from turning into deep mud after rain. The quarry road carried wagons every day. Kale named the place Hearthvale, after rejecting Nib's proposal of Nibopolis and Boro's suggestion of Goodpot. Hearthvale has dignity, Kale said. Nib looked around at the construction mud. We can add dignity later. The system recognized their growth. Settlement population threshold met. Multiple civic functions sustained for 60 days. Territory classification advanced. Village. Territory points gained, 10. Current territory points, 18. Kale spent 3 points on the storehouse, 3 on the main workshop, and 4 on the most important palisade sections. The storehouse reached a rank where grain stayed dry through long storms and pests found fewer ways inside. The workshop gained stronger framing, safer furnaces, and better ventilation. The reinforced palisade sections became tougher and easier to repair. Current territory points? 8. None of it solved the problem that arrived with the first frost. Miri placed 3 ledgers on Kale's table and pushed one toward him. Winter. Kale read the totals. The settlement had more food than when it began. It also had almost 8 times as many mouths. How short? If hunting remains good, 12%. If hunting worsens after heavy snow, 20%. If we accept more refugees at the current rate, much worse. Boro leaned over her shoulder. I can stretch grain with root vegetables. For a while, Sarah tapped the map. There are wild herds farther north, but following them takes hunters away from the walls. Kale looked at the numbers again. They could survive by closing the gate to new arrivals, cutting rations, and hoping the winter stayed mild. He did not like any part of that plan. We need trade. Miri nodded. Yes. What can we sell? Nib answered first. Stone. Boro said. Charcoal. The soap maker, invited because Kale had learned not to plan markets without producers, offered soap and tallow candles. Miri shook her head. Useful. Low value compared with transport cost. We need something worth hauling through winter. Tools would work. Nettle fittings. Nails. Axes. Cart hardware. Kale looked at Goran. Where do we get iron? Goran answered with a name. Blackvein. Sarah's ears flattened. Kale noticed. That sounds encouraging. Old mine east of the quarry, she said. Abandoned after cave mantises moved in. How much iron? Enough that Dargan used to send workers there before too many stopped coming back. Kale looked at the map. A mine would give them trade goods, better tools, better weapons, and construction hardware. It would also require taking workers into a place full of giant predatory insects. Miri closed the ledger. Before you say yes, I would like to remind you that dead workers pay very little tax. We do not have taxes yet. Then they pay none at all. Even worse. Kale smiled despite himself. Goran nodded. Sarah stood. Good, Kale added, and if it can be cleared, we clear it. Sarah sat back down. There it is. They began preparing for Blackvein the next morning. 2 days later, Dargan struck without sending a soldier. A merchant caravan from the south appeared on the road, stopped within sight of Hearthvale's gate, then turned around. Sarah caught up to it before sunset. The merchant showed her a wax-sealed order bearing Dargan's tusked skull. Any trader dealing with Hearthvale would lose access to the southern markets and pay double tolls on every road under Dargan's control. The message reached Kale over dinner. Miri listened, then slowly put down her spoon. He is not coming for the wall. Kale looked at the winter ledger. He is coming for the pantry. Dargan's blockade forced Kale to solve 2 problems at once. Hearthvale needed iron badly enough to risk Blackvein, and even a mountain of iron was useless if no merchant dared carry it beyond the valley. Kale started with the mine. Blackvein opened in the side of a dark hill 2 hours east of the quarry. The entrance was large enough for a wagon. Old timber supports framed a tunnel that descended at a shallow angle into the rock. Sarah spent a full day observing it from the ridge. At sunset, she returned with a bundle wrapped in cloth and placed it on the council table. Inside lay a glossy black foreleg as long as Kale's arm. Nib moved his chair backward. That is unnecessarily large. Sarah tapped the serrated inner edge. Cave mantis. Young one. Young? The adults are larger. Nib moved the chair farther back. Goran asked how many. I saw 4 enter, 2 leave. There may be a nest chamber deeper inside. Kale looked at the mine plans they had pieced together from Goran's memory and an old charcoal worker who had once hauled ore there. The first galleries were simple. A central hull tunnel split into 3 working branches. An underground drainage channel ran beneath the eastern side. Do they hunt by sight? Sarah shook her head. Movement and vibration. They feel feet through stone. That made entering as a large formation dangerous. Kale had no intention of sending 20 people underground to discover that one narrow tunnel could turn their numbers into a disadvantage. They prepared for 3 days. Goran selected 8 experienced fighters and 6 shield bearers. Sarah brought 4 hunters. Nib and 2 miners would enter only after the front galleries were cleared. Kale went because he needed to inspect the site before the system would recognize practical control. But everyone agreed he would remain behind the fighting line. Miri did not agree that he should go at all. You are the only person who can use the system, which is why I have to establish the mine. If you die, the mine becomes less important. Miri stared at him over her spectacles. Kale added, I will stay behind Goran. Behind 2 Gorans would be better. Goran, standing by the door, nodded solemnly. Correct. They entered Black Vein shortly after sunrise. The first 100 steps smelled of damp stone and old rot. Rusted rails for ore carts ran along the floor. Water dripped somewhere deeper inside. The fighters had wrapped cloth around metal fittings to reduce noise. Nobody carried a bright torch at the front. Cave mantises had weak night vision, according to Sarah, and their stronger senses came from movement and vibration. The group used hooded lamps behind the shield line instead. They found the first mantis in the ceiling. Kale saw a shape detach from the rock and had time to think that it looked too thin to be that heavy. Then it fell. The mantis struck the lead shield with both hooked forelegs. The impact drove the orc behind it to one knee. One blade punched through the wooden surface and stopped a finger from his shoulder. Goran rammed his spear into the joint beneath the creature's head. The mantis twisted sideways with frightening speed. Its second foreleg cut the spear shaft in half. Sarah fired from behind the line. Her arrow entered one of the compound eyes. The creature recoiled. 2 shield bearers surged forward together and pinned it against the wall, while the fighters thrust into the softer abdomen. It died, still chopping grooves into the floor. Kale looked at the ruined shield. 1. Goran nodded, and it attacked from above. Everyone started looking at the ceiling. They moved more slowly. Gorun sent 2 fighters to check the entrance. A mantis burst from a pile of broken supports and caught one orc across the thigh. He screamed and fell. A second creature came from the side passage. The formation split. Kale backed against the wall, as ordered, and forced himself to watch, instead of running toward the injured man. The first mantis had exposed its abdomen while striking. Sarah and 2 hunters filled the soft section with arrows, but the second creature pressed Goran's group into the main tunnel. There was no room for the old orc to swing his shortened spear. Kale looked at the mine wall. A rusted ore cart sat on the rail behind them. The tunnel sloped downward toward the mantis. Move the cart. Nib, who was supposed to remain in the rear, looked at him. Where? Downhill. There is a giant insect downhill. Kale and Nib pulled the wooden brake lever free. It refused to move. Decades of rust had locked the wheel axle. Boro, included because his heavy axe was useful in tight spaces, shoved both of them aside. He hit the brake mechanism once. Metal snapped. The cart rolled 6 inches. Boro put both hands on the rear and pushed. The slope took over. Clear the rail, Kale shouted. Goran glanced back and threw himself against the wall. The mantis followed his movement and stepped directly onto the track. The ore cart hit one of its rear legs. The leg folded with a wet crack. The creature spun, striking at the cart, and exposed its side. Goran drove the broken end of his spear into the joint behind its head. Boro arrived a moment later and buried the axe in the same wound. The mantis collapsed. The first creature died seconds after it. The wounded orc was alive. The foreleg had cut through muscle, but missed the major artery. They bandaged him tightly and sent him back with 2 escorts. Kale considered ending the expedition. Goran saw the thought on his face. We can continue. We lost 3 people from the group already. 1 wounded, 2 carrying him. We still have enough. Sarah crouched near the scrape marks, and now they know we are here. If there is a nest, waiting means they may move deeper or come out at night. Kale hated decisions where every option was bad. We continue to the main gallery. We do not chase anything deeper. If we find more than we can isolate, we leave. Nobody argued. The nest chamber turned out to be the old sorting hall. They smelled it before they saw it. The air carried an acidic odor mixed with old meat. Sarah stopped at the corner and held up a closed fist. She crawled forward alone, looked around the edge, then returned. 3 adults, one very large, eggs on the far wall. Gorun's jaw tightened. Open room? Wide, high ceiling. A direct fight would be ugly. Kale studied the old mine plan by lamplight. The sorting hall had once connected to a loading shaft above. The surface opening had collapsed, but the vertical shaft still existed somewhere behind the nest. More interesting was the drainage channel beneath the floor. How deep is that water? Nib peered at the map. Was waist deep when the mine worked. Maybe more now. Where does it enter the hall? Under the western grate. Kale asked Sarah whether the mantises could swim. She gave him an irritated look. I have never interviewed one. Fair. Nib rubbed his chin. We do not need them to swim. The old gate upstream controlled drainage. If it still exists, opening it might flood the low floor. Kale understood. The mantises depended on feeling movement through the stone. Fast water, debris, and a flooded floor might disrupt them long enough to fight on better terms. It was a gamble built on 2 unknowns. Kale preferred it to charging 3 giant insects. They found the drainage gate 60 paces back. It was almost completely seized. Nib, Boro, and 2 miners worked on it, while Goran's fighters held the corridor. The metal wheel turned a quarter rotation. Water hissed through somewhere below. Another quarter. The sound grew. Then the gate jammed. Nib put his full weight on the wheel and achieved nothing. Boro shoved him aside with the gentleness of someone moving a chair. Again? He asked. Nib pointed at the wheel. Do not break the part we need. Boro gripped it. His shoulders tightened. The wheel moved. Something beneath them slammed open. Water roared through the drainage channel. They returned to the sorting hall. The effect was visible immediately. Muddy water surged through cracks in the lower floor and spread across the chamber. Pieces of rotten wood floated between old stone platforms. The mantises were agitated. One struck repeatedly at the moving debris. Kale whispered the plan. The shield bearers entered first, stepping from dry raised platform to platform. The hunters shot the nearest adult, then retreated deliberately. The mantis followed. Its hooked feet hit the flooded floor. It hesitated. That half second mattered. Goran's group attacked from both sides. Shields pinned the forelegs outward. Spears went under the thorax. Sarah put an arrow into an eye. The mantis fought hard enough to break one shield and cut a fighter across the chest, but it died before the other 2 reached them. The largest mantis came next. It ignored the water better than Kale hoped and crossed the room in a series of long jumps. One shield bearer went down immediately. Gorun blocked a foreleg with his spear shaft and was thrown into an ore table. His bad knee folded under him. Kale's pulse hammered. He saw the 3rd mantis climbing along the far wall toward the group. They were about to be trapped. Back to the grate, he shouted. Goran tried to stand. His knee failed. Boro grabbed the back of his armor and dragged him toward the western side, while the shield line retreated. The large mantis followed. Kale noticed the old sorting platform above the drainage grate. Its stone legs had been undercut by years of water. One support leaned visibly. The system gave him no glowing weakness marker. He had eyes and Nib. That platform? Stable? Nib glanced once. No. Can we make it less stable? Nib's fear vanished behind professional offense. Very easily. They retreated past the platform. The mantis climbed over it, rather than through the water. Nib struck the cracked support with a hammer. Once, twice, nothing. Boro added his axe. Stone split. The platform dropped on one side. The mantis lost balance and slid toward the open drainage grate. One hooked leg caught the edge. Gorun, still on one knee, drove a spear into the limb joint. Boro chopped the same joint. The leg came free. The creature fell into the drainage channel, its body wedged halfway through the opening. Water hammered against it, pinning the abdomen below, while the upper half thrashed above. Every fighter who could reach it attacked at once. The 3rd mantis arrived too late. Sarah, and the hunters kept it occupied from range until the shield line reformed. Once isolated, it died like the first. Nobody cheered immediately. They were too tired. Gorun sat against the wall, while Sarah wrapped his swollen knee. Kale crouched beside him. "Can you walk?" "Badly." "That is your normal speed." Gorun looked at him for a second, then laughed through the pain. They destroyed the egg cluster before leaving. Black Vein was not safe after one expedition. Smaller predators still lived in side tunnels. Supports needed inspection, and the lower levels remained unexplored. Kale did not declare victory over the entire mountain. He declared the first galleries clear. Over the next 10 days, miners entered with guards. They repaired supports, closed dangerous branches, rebuilt drainage, and established a surface camp with a storehouse and palisade. Only then did the system recognize the site. Operational iron mine established. Territory control extended along maintained road and guarded worksite. Territory points gained, 8. Current territory points, 16. The first wagon of ore reached Hearthvale before the first snow. Nib supervised construction of a proper forge beside the charcoal yard. An elderly orc named Hadric, who had spent 40 years as a smith before losing 3 fingers, took command of it. Kale asked whether the missing fingers would be a problem. Hadric held up his hand. "Lost them 30 years ago. If they were important, I would have noticed." The forge became functional. The first rank upgrade cost 3 territory points. Kale approved it, leaving 13 in reserve. The changes were practical and powerful. The furnace drew air more evenly. Heat remained stable. The chimney pulled smoke cleanly. Work surfaces settled level. Tool racks fit the people using them. The quenching trough held temperature better. Hadric tested the improved forge by making 3 axe heads from the same batch of iron he had used before. He examined the edges, then looked at Kale. Same ore, same hands, less waste, better steel. How much better? Enough that merchants will pay. Miri, standing beside them with her ledger, smiled in a way Kale had learned to fear. Good, now we need merchants. Dargan's roads remained closed. Sarah knew another route. A narrow northern track crossed the ridge and reached a beastfolk market town named Reed Cross. It was longer, rougher, and outside Dargan's direct patrols. Hearthvale spent 3 weeks improving the first section into a wagon road. The system did not upgrade the entire route automatically. Practical control extended only as far as patrols and maintained way stations. Kale built the road in stages, placing small guarded shelters at difficult crossings. When the first 3 way stations had regular guards, maintenance crews, and scheduled traffic, the system finally recognized an external transport function. Sustained external transport route established. Territory points gained, 6. Current territory points, 19. By midwinter, the first Hearthvale caravan left for Reed Cross. 6 wagons carried iron tools, charcoal, soap, stone fittings, and the first carefully packed crates of Hadric's improved axes. Until that winter, most public work in Hearthvale had been compensated through rations, housing, communal stores, and barter. Reed Cross used stamped silver marks, with 20 copper bits to 1 silver mark, so Miri adopted the same standard for external accounts. An ordinary laborer in Reed Cross earned 4 to 6 copper bits for a day of work. A 40-kilogram sack of common grain cost around 16 copper in a good season and could rise above 20 in winter. Miri wanted enough sales revenue to buy grain, salt, wool, and dried beans while still paying road tolls, guards, and wagon maintenance. Kale did not travel with it. Miri had won that argument. Your presence does not increase wagon speed. I am negotiating. You? Miri's whiskers twitched. Would you prefer Boro? From the kitchen, Boro shouted that he had excellent prices. Miri closed Kale's mouth by handing him 3 pages of work that needed approval in Hearthvale. She led the caravan herself, with Sarah commanding scouts and 20 guards under one of Goran's lieutenants. The journey to Reed Cross succeeded. The return nearly did not. Sarah spotted the ambush because one crow on the southern ridge kept returning to the same dead tree. There should have been several birds around the grain wagons. Instead, Something had disturbed the ground below that tree and kept them away. She signaled the caravan to stop 200 paces before a narrow cut between rocks. Miri climbed down from the lead wagon. Problem? People waiting ahead. How many? At least 30. Miri looked at the 6 wagons loaded with winter grain. They could turn around, but the road behind them added 4 days. Hearthvale had enough reserve for that. A heavy snowstorm visible over the ridge might make the return much worse. The nearest fortified way station stood less than half a mile behind them. Miri made the decision. Back to the station, slowly. Do not make them think we are running until the wagons turn. The ambushers realized they had been seen. Orcs and hired beast folk emerged from the rocks. At their front rode Rusk. Sarah's ears flattened. Interesting. Miri recognized him from description. Kale released that one. Yes, I will add it to the cost of mercy. Then, Rusk raised both hands and shouted across the distance. Move faster! Dargon's men are behind me. Sarah stared. Another horn sounded from the cut. More fighters appeared. Rusk and 6 riders turned their mounts and charged them instead. Miri did not waste time asking questions. The caravan raced for the way station. The outpost was simple. A square wooden enclosure surrounded a stone-based shelter, stable, water barrel, and signal mast. 12 permanent guards lived there. It had never been designed to stop an army. It was enough to stop raiders from taking 6 wagons quickly. The gates closed with the caravan inside. Sarah climbed the tower and counted roughly 50 attackers approaching from the road. Rusk's 7 riders reached the gate moments later. The guards raised bows. Rusk shouted, "If you shoot me after the human released me, I will be offended." Miri stood on the wall. "Give me one reason not to. Dargon ordered us to burn your caravan. I said I would rather not die for his grain problem." Miri considered that. 2 reasons. I know how he attacks these stations. The gate opened. Rusk came inside. Rusk explained the rest while the defenders prepared. Dargon had ordered 3 small villages stripped of winter food to supply soldiers, and several of Rusk's men had families there. Rusk accepted command of the caravan ambush because refusing in Dargon's hall would have meant arrest. It also put him on the road with 6 men he trusted. He could not send an earlier warning while Dargon's riders watched him. So he waited until the caravan was in sight, turned on the raiders, and hoped Hearthvale would open the gate. Before taking the ambush assignment, Rusk had paid a charcoal burner to carry a warning to their families and move them toward a camp outside Dargon's patrol pattern. If Hearthvale survived the station attack, Sarah's scouts could bring them the rest of the way. Rusk wanted a ruler who would leave those families enough grain to survive winter. That reason was simple enough for Miri to believe. The raiders reached the station minutes later. Their leader knew the same weakness Rusk did. The enclosure had a blind side, where the ground rose near the eastern wall. They will put archers there and burn the roof, Rusk said. Sarah looked at the hill. Can we stop them? Not from inside. Miri did a quick count. 39 defenders, including caravan guards and Rusk's men. 50 attackers. The defenders had a wall, but limited water and 6 wagons that could not be replaced before spring. Sarah proposed a short sortie before the enemy occupied the hill. Miri hated it. She approved it. Sarah led 12 fighters through the rear service gate while the main defenders made noise at the front. The attackers began their first push against the main gate. Shields covered men carrying bundles of dry brush. Rusk stood on the wall and called one of them by name. The attacker looked up. Rusk threw a stone that hit him in the forehead. "You always were slow, Vec." The insult achieved more than the stone. Several attackers shouted back, their attention shifting upward. Sarah's group reached the hill from the far side. They hit the enemy archers before the firing line formed. The fight on the slope became close and brutal. Sarah used the terrain, never standing directly against the heavier orcs. Her hunters moved between rocks, shot at legs, and forced pursuit into narrow gaps where 2 shield bearers waited. The enemy commander realized the danger and sent reinforcements uphill. That weakened the gate attack. Miri saw the change. Open the front gate. One guard stared at her. They are outside. Yes, that is traditionally where enemies are. Open it. Rusk laughed. The gate opened just enough for a compact shield group to charge the raiders struggling with brush bundles. They knocked the front line backward, killed 2 men, then retreated before the larger force could surround them. The gate slammed shut. The attackers lost their fire bundles. On the hill, Sarah's group drove the archers off the high ground and withdrew. The enemy commander tried one more assault at dusk. This time, Rusk shouted the names of several attackers and told them exactly how much grain Dargan had taken from their villages. The line hesitated. One orc lowered his axe. Another did the same. The commander struck the nearest man with the flat of his sword.
That was enough.
Half the raiding group walked away. The rest retreated after dark. The caravan reached Hearthvale 2 days later, with every wagon. Each wagon returned close to its safe winter load. Miri's final count listed 170 sacks of grain, 40 sacks of dried beans, 12 sacks of salt, and several bales of wool. The food weighed a little over 8 metric tons. Her worst winter projection had put Hearthvale's shortage just under 6 tons of grain equivalent, so the caravan closed the gap and left a reserve for storms or failed hunting. The export cargo had sold for 248 silver marks. Food and other purchases cost 196. Tolls, guard pay, fodder, repairs, and lodging cost 27 more. The remaining 25 silver marks stayed in the public reserve. Kale stood at the gate, while residents cheered the arrival of grain. Then he saw Rusk riding beside Miri. Kale looked at the Ratkin accountant. Miri climbed down from the wagon. Your prisoner followed us home. Rusk dismounted. I resigned. From tax collection? From Dargan. Why? Rusk looked at the walls, the busy gate, and the workers unloading winter food. Because when Dargan loses men, he finds more men. When you nearly lose people, you build something so it happens less next time. Kale held his gaze. You understand that Goran decides whether you join the guard. Rusk grimaced. He dislikes me. You attacked his gate. That seems temporary. Goran, standing above them, called down. It is not. Rusk sighed. The gate crowd did not welcome him as quickly as Kale did. One of the defenders wounded during Rusk's first attack spat into the mud near his boots. 2 guards demanded that the 7 riders surrender their weapons before entering the residential district. Gorun made the terms himself. Rusk and his 6 men would spend 30 days on probation. They would serve road patrols under Sarah, hold no independent command, sleep in the guard barracks, and carry only duty weapons issued at the start of each shift. Any violence against a resident outside self-defense ended the arrangement. Rusk listened without arguing. Fair. Sarah brought the riders' families into Hearthvale 4 days later. That did more for trust than any speech. By the end of the probation month, Goran allowed the 7 men into the regular guard, although Rusk still received no independent command until spring. Hearthvale survived the winter. Nobody starved. The market reopened every 5th day, even when snow covered the roofs. Iron tools traveled north. Grain and salt traveled south through Reedcross. Small villages that had once depended on Dargan began using Hearthvale's road because its way stations were guarded. The town grew while the rest of the border region tightened under the war chief's demands. In early spring, Kale visited Blackvein with Nib to approve an expanded ore store. On the ridge above the mine, he noticed a stretch of exposed rock that looked different from everything around it. Intense heat had softened the stone until it flowed down the slope and hardened again in frozen black waves. Kale touched the surface. What did this? Goran, who had insisted on coming despite his knee, went quiet. Rusk answered, Dragonfire. Kale looked up. Here? Veiros hunted these ridges before Dargan's grandfather was born. Every strong ruler in the region used to pay the ash tithe, grain, or livestock. Whatever the dragon asked. Used to? Veiros sleeps for years, sometimes decades. Dargan still keeps an old tribute vault in case he wakes. Nib stared at the melted stone. How much fire makes rock do that? Goran answered quietly. Enough. Kale studied the ridge for another moment, then continued toward the mine. Veros might wake next week or 30 years later. The date mattered less than Hearthvale's obvious weakness. A wooden town packed with charcoal yards and grain roofs could lose half its districts to one serious fire. That evening, he added 3 items to Nib's spring construction list: stone fire breaks, covered cisterns, wider main streets. Nib read the list. Planning for a dragon? Planning for fire. Very different? Kale looked toward the Black Ridge. I hope so. Spring turned Hearthvale's winter success into a political problem. The northern road stayed open after the snow melted. Merchants from Reed Cross began arriving without escorts large enough for war. They bought tools, hinges, nails, charcoal, soap, cut stone, and eventually simple plows made in Hadrick's improved forge. Miri introduced market fees and nearly caused a rebellion among traders who had previously assumed Kale's dislike of tribute meant he disliked taxes. She set the ordinary gate charge at 1 copper bit per wagon, 2 for heavy freight, and 1 copper per market stall per day. At first, those fees covered roughly half the wages and supplies for the northern road crews and way station guards. Iron exports and workshop leases covered most of the remainder. A gate fee is tribute, one merchant complained. Miri adjusted her gold spectacles. Tribute is money taken because someone has an axe. A gate fee pays the people who remove mud from the road your wagon uses. It is still money leaving my pocket. The merchant paid. Kale listened to the argument from a nearby table and realized Miri had become more frightening to traders than Goron. Hearthvale expanded beyond its original wall in planned sections. Nib refused to repeat the cramped arrangement of the first winter. New streets were wider. Drainage ran beneath timber grates. Workshops that used open flame moved toward stone yards separated from homes. Covered cisterns appeared at major intersections. Completed structures became eligible for upgrades when Kale chose to spend points. Street width, district placement, drainage routes, workshop locations, and every other planning decision still came from the people building the town. That human part of the work became more important as the population grew. A settlement of 300 could survive mistakes because one person could run across it in minutes. A town of 800 could not. Kale established 2 new farming hamlets along the southern fields. Each had a guarded road connection, a well, storage, and a small watchpost. The system extended practical territory only after patrols began moving between them regularly. Sarah had resisted permanent scout huts when Kale first proposed them. Her old Lynx band had survived by moving whenever a stronger clan claimed a route or hunting ground. A fixed post had once sounded like a place an enemy could find twice. By spring, she was the one asking Nib for a 3rd watch shelter on the northern road. Kale noticed the change. You used to hate permanent posts. Sarah kept one claw on the map. I got tired of routes that only went away from somewhere. That was all she said. But Kale approved the shelter. The first time a village head asked Kale whether she was allowed to upgrade her own barn, he had to explain that the system responded only to him. She frowned. So if you die, the barn stays ordinary? That is one concern. Miri, sitting beside him, wrote something in her ledger. Kale asked what? Increase your guard budget. He approved it. By midsummer, Hearthvale had more than 1,000 residents spread across the town and nearby farms. Most had not come from nowhere. They came from Dargon's border villages. His power had rested on a simple system. Every community paid grain and labor. Dargon kept enough warriors to punish refusal. Because villages were isolated, none could resist alone. Hearthvale broke the arrangement without trying to. A village named Longroot asked to use Kale's northern road. He agreed if they contributed workers to maintain the nearest way station. A month later, Longroot stopped paying Dargon's road toll. Another village signed a trade agreement with Hearthvale because Hadrick's plows increased its harvest. Then, 3 charcoal camps requested patrol protection in exchange for fixed taxes lower than Dargon's tribute. Kale accepted them only after Goron confirmed Hearthvale could actually protect the routes. Every decision pulled the border farther outward. Dargon finally answered in person. He came to Hearthvale with 30 riders under a white truce cloth. Kale met him outside the gate. The war chief was enormous, even by orc standards. His skin was a dark brick red. The sides of his head were shaved, leaving a long black top knot that fell between his shoulder blades. Both tusks were capped in black iron. A wolfskin mantle hung over armor made from layered metal plates. Rusk stood on Hearthvale's wall and watched his former commander approach. Dargan noticed him immediately. "You kept the dog." Kale looked up at Rusk. "He has been useful." Rusk called down, "More useful since I stopped working for you." Dargan ignored him. He studied Hearthvale for a long time. The town no longer looked like something 20 riders could intimidate. The main gate sat on a stone foundation. The oldest palisade had become an outer commercial wall, while a newer defensive line protected the expanded residential district. Watchtowers stood at regular intervals. Wagons moved through the northern road behind the town. Dargan looked back at Kale. "You have cost me 5 settlements. I did not take them. They pay you for roads and patrols they asked for. They paid me first. That is not the same thing." Dargan smiled slightly. "You speak like someone who has never had to hold land." Kale glanced at the walls. "I am learning." The warchief's smile disappeared. He offered terms. Hearthvale could keep its internal government, roads, mine, and markets. Kale would acknowledge Dargan as overlord, return the 5 settlements to his tax authority, and provide 100 equipped soldiers whenever called. It was a better offer than Kale expected. That made it more dangerous. Dargan understood that destroying Hearthvale would waste something valuable. He wanted to absorb it. Kale declined. Dargan asked why. "Because everything you allow me to keep today can be taken tomorrow." "That is true under every ruler." "Then I prefer the ruler here." Dargan's eyes moved over Kale's narrow shoulders. "You?" The warchief laughed once. "You are the weakest ruler I have ever met." Kale had heard versions of that statement too many times to care. "Then, beating me should be easy." Dargan looked toward the towers again. "That is what worries me." He rode away without threatening them. Gorun watched the riders until they disappeared. "He will come with everything." Kale nodded. Miri asked, "How long?" Rusk answered from the wall. "After harvest. He needs food for an army." That gave Hearthvale 3 months. Kale used every day. The council's first argument concerned the wall. Nib wanted stone. Miri wanted grain. Gurren wanted more soldiers. Sarah wanted more scouts. Boro wanted all of them to stop planning while hungry, and forced bowls of stew into their hands. Kale listened until everyone had made the same argument twice. Then he divided the problem. They could not build a complete stone fortress in 3 months. Trying would consume labor needed for harvest and weapons. Instead, Nib strengthened the sections an army was most likely to attack. The main gate received a stone gatehouse with heavy timber doors. The eastern wall, facing the easiest approach from Dargan's lands, gained an earth ditch and a second internal barrier. Towers were rebuilt with roofed fighting platforms. Miri purchased grain early, before regional prices rose. She hated the expense and complained every time she signed a payment. She also emptied exposed farm stores before the army arrived. Seed grain went into stone-lined caches. Livestock moved behind the northern and western patrol lines. The 2 southern farming hamlets received evacuation schedules, and anything that could feed an invading army was either brought inside Hearthvale or hidden in marked underground stores. Dargan had waited until after harvest to march, so his soldiers would find cut fields and mostly empty barns. Gorun expanded the permanent guard to 180 and organized another 300 residents into militia companies. Not all were warriors. Their duties included carrying water, moving arrows, replacing damaged barricades, transporting wounded, and holding secondary lines. Sarah created a chain of observation posts south of the town. Each could signal the next, with flags by day and shuttered lamps by night. Kale spent 14 territory points on 5 upgrades that supported the whole defense. The main granary cost 3. A second cistern cost 2. The smithy district cost 3. The completed gatehouse cost 4. Goran's training yard cost 2 after it had instructors, schedules, equipment, and regular recruits using it. Current territory points, 5. The training yard produced no superhuman soldiers. It gave them level ground, protected weapon racks, durable practice structures, and enough organization to train repeatedly without wasting half the day fixing equipment. Nib and Hodrick also built one heavy bolt thrower from laminated timber, forge-made iron fittings, and the winding gear of an old quarry winch. The first test shot buried itself in a drainage bank well short of Nib's painted target. Nib stared at the bolt. Sarah said, "Good. Now we know where not to aim." They adjusted the frame, tested again, and marked distances along the eastern approach. By the time Dargan marched, the ugly prototype sat on an inner tower with a crew that had practiced loading it dozens of times. The effect accumulated. Men and women who would once have drilled once a month could train 3 times a week without losing half the day to broken equipment or chaos. Kale also made mistakes. His worst one looked harmless at first. The eastern wall stood on ground that sloped gently toward a seasonal stream. During the dry months, Nib reinforced the visible side, and Kale approved it as a priority. They assumed the old drainage ditch beneath the outer embankment still worked. Then, heavy rain came 2 weeks before Dargan's expected attack. Water pooled behind the eastern earthworks. A section of ground sank nearly a foot. Nib discovered it at dawn and ran into Kale's office so quickly that one copper goggle was hanging from his ear. "The wall is sitting on soup." Kale was at the site 10 minutes later. The damage was not dramatic. That made it worse. The wall still stood. To an untrained eye, nothing was wrong. Nib pushed a measuring pole into the soil beside a support. It sank deep, with little resistance. We concentrated weight here and never reopened the old culvert. Kale stared at the muddy slope. "My order." Nib looked at him. "My wall." Neither excuse repaired it. They diverted workers from the Western Tower project, dug drainage channels, and added gravel and stone fill. They improved the section enough to remain standing. They could not make the soil dry in 2 weeks. Sarah marked it as a likely weakness on the defense map. Kale hated seeing it there. "If we found it, Dargan can find it." Goran nodded. "Assume he does." So they built the retreat plan around failure. That decision saved the town. Dargan's army appeared 19 days later. Sarah's southern post sent the first signal before noon. 1 flag, large force. The next post added a second, more than 500. By evening, the scouts estimated nearly 1,100 fighters, including 40 ogres, several dozen archers, and 3 crews carrying heavy rams. Hearthvale had 180 trained guards, 300 militia, and perhaps another 200 residents physically capable of fighting if the inner town was breached. Kale refused to count the last group as soldiers. "They are the reason the walls exist," he told Goran. "If we reach the point where Boro's bakers are holding the gate, something has gone badly wrong." Boro heard about the comment and sharpened his wood axe anyway. Dargan's army camped beyond bow range on the southern fields. They did not attack the first night. That made the waiting worse. Kale walked the wall at sunset. The enemy camp covered the ground with hundreds of cook fires. Drums sounded occasionally. Large shapes moved near the ram crews. A young goblin guard beside him swallowed repeatedly. "Do you think the wall will hold?" Kale looked at the timber beneath his hand. "Some of it will. Some of it probably will not." The goblin's face went pale green. Kale pointed behind them. "That is why there is another line. Goran trained you to know where to go. Nib built barriers. Sarah knows their numbers. Boro has food ready. Miri has medical supplies and reserve water assigned by district. We are not asking one wall to save us." The goblin breathed more slowly. Kale continued walking. He had said it for himself as much as the guard. Dargan attacked at sunrise. The first assault was a test. 200 fighters advanced with large hide shields. Archers behind them fired high volleys to force defenders off the platforms. The orcs did not attempt the gate. They struck 3 separate wall sections, testing response speed. Goran refused to move reserves early. "He wants to see where we panic." Kale stood in the central command tower, with maps pinned to a long table. Sarah's signal runners reported from each sector. The north remained quiet. West, quiet. East, under moderate pressure. South Gate, under arrows. Dargan withdrew after less than an hour. Hearthvale had 2 wounded. The enemy had perhaps 6. Nobody celebrated. Goran looked south. Now he knows. The second assault began before noon. This time the drums concentrated east. Kale felt his stomach sink. Dargan had found the wet ground. Ogres approached carrying thick bundles of wood and earth. Under archery cover, they dumped the material into Hearthvale's outer ditch. Defenders shot at them, but an ogre could take a wound that would drop a human or goblin and keep moving. Behind them came shielded axe teams. The eastern defenders held the first rush. Then Dargan sent more. Kale watched signal flags from the tower. East requested reserves. Gorun sent 40. A runner arrived 5 minutes later, mud to his knees. Support post E7 shifted. Nib swore. Kale asked, "How much?" Handspan at the top. Ground is opening around the base. The wall had not broken yet. Kale could send workers to brace it. He looked at the map and remembered the discussion after the rain. Assume it fails. Begin withdrawal from E6 through E9. The runner stared. Sir, the wall is still standing. For now. Pull the archers to the inner platforms. Leave 2 spear teams to cover. Nib looked at Kale, understood, and grabbed his helmet. I will handle the gate in the inner line. Do not stand under anything you built. Nib glared at him. I build very good things. The retreat began before Dargan realized it. That prevented a disaster. 20 minutes later, 3 ogres hit the weakened section, together with a suspended log. The saturated earth shifted. 2 support posts sank sideways. The wall leaned, paused, then collapsed outward in a 30-foot section. Dargan's army roared. The first orcs charged through the breach, expecting defenders trapped beneath fallen timber. They found an empty strip of muddy ground. Then, arrows struck from the second line. The inner defense was lower than the outer wall, but built on dry stone-based ground between storehouses. Narrow passages forced attackers into 2 lanes. Dargan adapted immediately. He sent shield-bearers forward and ordered archers to target the inner platforms. His ogres began clearing fallen timber to widen the breach. Kale had hoped the collapsed wall would slow them longer. It did not. Second East Reserve, he ordered. Goran hesitated. That leaves the south gate thin. He has committed his ogres east. If he heads south now, it is infantry only. Goran nodded and sent the reserve. The battle became a contest of pressure. Dargan pushed enough fighters into the east to make Hearthvale commit defenders. Then he launched a smaller assault on the south gate, forcing Goran to move 30 people back. When the gate held, Dargan shifted archers north to threaten the granary roofs with fire. Kale's preparation paid for time. Stone fire breaks prevented one burning roof from spreading to the next. Water crews moved from cisterns rather than running all the way to the central well. Wide streets allowed wounded defenders to be carried toward the clinic without colliding with reinforcements. The fire breaks, cisterns, and wide streets kept the town functioning, while an army tried to tear it apart. By late afternoon, Dargan controlled the abandoned eastern outer district. Hearthvale still held the inner line. Then the war chief changed the battle. His men dragged 6 captured farm carts toward the inner defense. They lashed thick hides across the fronts, piled wet earth on the floors, and used them as moving shields. Arrows struck uselessly into leather and mud. Behind the carts, axe teams advanced toward the barricades. Goran watched from the command tower. That is new. Kale remembered Rusk's description of Dargan. He learned quickly. Can we burn them? Wet hides. Drop stones? Too low. Sarah arrived, breathing hard after running from the north tower. The carts are tied together in pairs. Their rear wheels are exposed when they turn into the inner lanes. The lanes angled slightly before the barricade. Can your hunters hit the axles from the side roofs? With heavy arrows, Nib said. Better. Hit the wheel wedges. Old farm carts use wood pins through the hub. Break one, and the wheel walks off. Kale sent the order. The first cart pair entered the northern lane. Hunters waited until the drivers turned. Sarah fired first. Her arrow struck the hub, but did not break the pin. Two more hit the wheel. One glanced away. The third split the exposed wooden wedge. The cart rolled another 6 feet. Its wheel came off. The heavy front dropped into the mud and twisted sideways, blocking the lane it was supposed to clear. Hearthvale's defenders cheered. Dargan solved the southern lane by sending an ogre to physically push the damaged cart aside. The creature got one shoulder under the frame. A ballista from the inner tower fired. The weapon was not magical. Nib's workshop had built it from laminated wood, iron fittings, and rope bundles. The improved tower gave the crew a stable platform and protected loading space. The bolt hit the ogre high in the chest. It did not kill him instantly. It knocked him backward and left him unable to lift his right arm. The assault faltered. Dargan withdrew again before sunset. The first day ended with Hearthvale missing its eastern wall and holding the rest. 23 defenders were dead. More than 60 were wounded. The enemy had lost perhaps 70. Kale walked through the clinic after dark. The numbers became people there. A goblin carpenter with an arrow wound in his stomach. One of Gorun's young guards missing 3 fingers. A mole beastman Tail remembered hiring for drainage work, now holding a cloth against his son's bleeding shoulder. Kale stopped beside every bed he recognized. He did not give speeches. He carried water when the healers asked, moved a crate when it blocked the aisle, and listened when the carpenter asked whether the eastern houses had burned. No, Kale told him. The firebreak held. The carpenter closed his eyes with relief. Outside, Miri found Kale sitting on the clinic steps. She handed him a cup of bitter tea. Eat. I am not hungry. Your appetite does not change your nutritional requirements. Kale drank. Miri sat beside him. The reserve grain is safe. The southern cistern lost 1 pipe. Nib has a crew on it. The clinic has enough bandages for tomorrow, if tomorrow is not much worse. That is comforting. It was not intended to be. Kale looked at the enemy fires beyond the wall. We cannot do this for 5 days. Miri knew better than to answer with encouragement. Then do not. Kale looked at her. She pointed toward Dargan's camp. They eat too. That was the opening. Dargan had brought enough grain for a siege, but his army depended on supply wagons from the south. Sarah's scouts had seen them arriving through a narrow wooded road. Kale could not defeat 1,100 fighters in the open. Open battle was unnecessary if he could make Dargan believe the town would outlast his army. Before dawn, Sarah left through a drainage gate with 30 scouts and Rusk. Their target lay on a supply road south of Dargan's camp. Sarah's observers had counted an 18-wagon resupply train coming north with grain, dried meat, lamp oil, and fodder, under an escort of roughly 60 fighters. The convoy would reach Dargan before noon. Rusk knew the road and the way Dargan protected wagons. He drew the formation in the dirt while they moved. Riders in front, infantry scattered along both sides, more riders at the rear. If danger appeared, the wagons closed nose to tail, while the escort formed outside them. Can we beat 60? One scout asked. No, Sarah said. Russ grinned without humor. That is why we attacked the wagons. They reached a wooded bend shortly after sunrise. A shallow stream ran beside the road, and the inside bank forced heavy wagons to slow. Sarah divided the scouts into 3 groups. One would block the front. One would strike the rear. Her group would hit the center only after the escort committed. They cut 2 dead trees almost through, leaving them held by rope. Nib would have complained about the workmanship. Sarah considered that a recommendation. The first wagon appeared an hour later. They let 6 pass the bend. Then Rusk pulled the first rope. The dead trunk fell across the road in front of the lead riders. Horses screamed and stopped. At the rear, the second tree dropped behind the last wagon. Dargan's escort reacted fast. Shield bearers moved outward. Archers turned toward the slopes. The wagon drivers began pulling their teams together exactly as Rusk had predicted. The first volley from Sarah's hunters targeted people holding reins, not armored fighters. 2 drivers fell. A third abandoned his seat. Rusk's group charged from the lower bank, cut 3 sets of harness, and slapped the freed draft animals toward the trees. The convoy compressed. That created the second problem. The grain would not burn. A scout threw a firepot onto a covered wagon. Flames spread across the canvas, then died against damp sacks underneath. Sarah swore. Rusk pointed farther down the line. 4th wagon, cooking grease and lamp oil. They shifted targets. Enemy archers found the range before they reached it. One arrow struck a lynx hunter through the shoulder. Another scout fell from the bank with an arrow under the ribs and did not get up. The escort captain pushed 20 fighters toward Rusk, trying to trap his mounted group between the wagons and the stream. Rusk could have escaped alone. He turned back for the wounded hunter instead. That cost him his horse. A spear punched through the animal's flank. Rusk hit the road, rolled beneath a wagon tongue, and came up with blood on one cheek. Sarah shot the spearman in the thigh and shouted for the scouts on the upper bank to loose. Arrows forced the escort to raise shields. Rusk dragged the wounded hunter behind a wheel. "Still think this ruler is cheaper?" Sarah called. "Ask me after we are alive." The third group reached the oil wagon. They smashed 2 clay jars against the wooden bed, threw fire into the spill, and ran. The wagon caught at once. Flame jumped to the next vehicle. Drivers tried to move the remaining teams, but the cut harnesses and blocked road had packed the convoy too tightly. Sarah's scouts slashed grain sacks on the wagons they could reach. Hundreds of kilograms spilled into mud and stream water. The escort captain finally cleared the rear tree with axes. That was Sarah's signal to leave. They abandoned the bend before the enemy could surround them. 11 wagons were burning or destroyed. 5 more had broken wheels, loose teams, or spilled cargo. 2 escaped south with part of their loads. Dargan soldiers pursued immediately. Rusk knew they would send riders along the high path to cut off the obvious return route, so he took the scouts into the stream instead. They traveled through shallow water until the tracks vanished, split into 3 groups at a stony fork, and left false prints toward the quarry road. They had 1 dead scout and 4 wounded when they reached the old charcoal track north of the stream. Sarah lit 3 prepared smoke bundles where Hearthvale's towers could see them. The raid had worked. Now they still had to get home. The second day began with Dargan attacking the south gate. He had noticed the defenders shifting east the previous day and guessed the south reserve was smaller. He was correct. The first ram reached the gate beneath overlapping shields. Hearthvale's archers could not stop it quickly enough. The gatehouse shook with each impact. Kale moved command from the central tower to the stone meeting hall, after enemy archers began targeting the tower windows. Goran protested only until a heavy arrow punched through the wood where Kale had been standing. "I have proved my point," Goran said. Kale pulled the arrow out of the table. "You usually enjoy that more. Today is busy." The south gate held for 12 strikes. On the 13th, the outer beam cracked. Nib heard the sound from inside and shouted for the second brace. Workers shoved a massive replacement timber into iron sockets they had installed during preparation. The next ram strike landed against a fresh support. Outside, Dargan's men heard the gate change tone. Their momentum died. They had expected 1 barrier. Nib had built 3. The war chief shifted to ladders. That nearly succeeded. A group of heavily armored orcs reached the western platform, while the defenders concentrated on the gate. 1 killed 2 militia fighters and opened enough space for 4 more to climb. Gorun led the counterattack himself. His bad knee no longer allowed fast movement, but on a narrow wall, speed mattered less than balance. He used a short spear and shield, driving the first orc against the railing while 2 guards struck from behind him. The second attacker swung an axe at Gorun's head. Gorun caught it on the shield. The impact split the rim and numbed his arm. Rusk was not there to support him. A young goblin guard named Pell stepped into the gap instead. He was barely taller than Goran's waist. Pell stabbed the attacker's exposed thigh. The orc turned toward him. Goran drove the broken shield edge into the man's jaw and pushed him from the wall. The defenders cleared the platform after several brutal minutes. Pell looked at the fallen shield. That was a good shield. Goran flexed his numb hand. was. At noon, 3 thick columns of smoke rose from the southern forest, far beyond Hearthvale's walls. Sarah's signal. Dargan saw them too. His supply wagons had burned. The war chief immediately sent 100 riders south. By the time the riders reached the burned bend, her scouts were already on separate routes north. Rusk's false trail pulled part of the pursuit toward the quarry road. Sarah brought the main group through the northern drainage gate shortly before sunset, with 4 wounded and the body of the scout they had lost. Dargan's second day ended with less progress than the first. The empty southern hamlets offered almost nothing to forage, and the destroyed resupply train had carried most of the food and fodder expected for the next several days. Rusk estimated that Dargan's camp now held perhaps 3 days of rations if the war chief cut portions immediately. Hearthvale's people knew it. The third morning, Dargan did something Cale had hoped he would not. He attacked everywhere. The goal was not to take the wall immediately. It was to exhaust the defenders, force mistakes, and find the point where Hearthvale had no reserve left. For 6 hours, fighting moved around the perimeter. A northern tower caught fire. Water crews saved the structure, but lost the roof. An ogre broke through an unfinished western parapet and had to be stopped in the street by 2 spear teams and a wagon pushed sideways as a barricade. The south gate lost its outer doors. Archers on both sides ran low on arrows and began recovering shafts from the ground. Cale moved between command posts as lines failed and reformed. Near midday, a stone from an enemy sling smashed through the roof edge of the western signal station. Cale heard Nib shout. Then the world turned white. He woke on the floor with blood running down the side of his face. A roof tile had cut his scalp. His left shoulder felt as though someone had hit it with a hammer. Goran was standing over him. Can you see? Yes. How many fingers? Cale focused. 3. Goran lowered one of 4 raised fingers. Good enough. We are moving. Cale did not argue. Being visible at a damaged command post was no longer useful leadership. They shifted to the meeting hall. The eastern inner line reported a breach 10 minutes later. Dargan entered Hearthvale personally. He came through the ruined outer district with nearly 100 of his best fighters and drove straight toward the central square. Goran studied the report. He is done waiting. Cale pressed a cloth against his bleeding scalp. He wants me. Yes. Good. Goran looked at him. Cale pointed to the street map. Dargan had chosen the fastest route from the eastern breach to the meeting hall. It passed through the old market district, where Hearthvale's original streets were narrow and crooked. Cale had spent months complaining about those streets. Now, they were useful. Close the north end after half his group enters. Use the freight wagons from the stone yard. Block the side alleys. You want to split him. He is bringing his strongest fighters into streets where only 6 can stand across. I want him to keep doing it. Goran called the reserve. Dargan reached the old market and found no civilians. They had been evacuated 2 days earlier. His front rank turned the first corner. Hearthvale defenders withdrew in front of them. Dargan pushed harder. Then 2 loaded stone wagons rolled from a side yard behind his formation and locked wheel to wheel across the street. 30 of his fighters were cut off from the main body. Dargan did not retreat. He roared and drove forward. That was the most dangerous moment of the siege. He was exactly what Cale was not. A single, powerful body, capable of changing a fight by itself. Dargan smashed the first spear aside and struck a defender hard enough to break his shield arm. He kicked another man into a wall. His black iron tusk caps flashed as he lowered his head and forced a 3-person shield line backward through sheer weight. Goran met him at the entrance to the central square. Dargan stopped. Old dog. Goran rested his spear against his shoulder. You have gotten louder, and you have become a human servant. Goran looked toward Cale, who stood 30 paces behind the reserve line with a bandage around his head. Better work. Dargan laughed and raised his axe. Duel me. Goran's expression did not change. Goran lifted 2 fingers. The spear teams on both sides advanced. I work for a man who builds walls, Goran said. Why would I throw mine away? Dargan charged anyway. Goran met Dargan with a formation built to contain one overwhelmingly strong fighter. The front shield pair took Dargan's first impact and immediately separated, rather than absorbing the full force. Two spears thrust at his legs from angles. He knocked one aside, but the second scraped beneath his knee armor. Dargan swung his axe horizontally. Gorun ducked. The blade cut through a spear shaft and struck a timber post hard enough to bury itself. Three defenders rushed him while the weapon was stuck. Dargan abandoned the axe, seized one shield by the rim, and pulled its owner forward. He punched the man once and sent him down. Goran struck Dargan's shoulder with the butt of his spear. The war chief barely moved. Dargan grabbed the shaft. Goran let go before he could be dragged off balance. The old orc stepped backward, drawing Dargan onto a mark cut into the street stones. A militia team above the street released a hanging timber barrier. Dargan saw it late and threw himself sideways. The heavy beam crashed between him and half his surviving followers. Now only 9 of Dargan's fighters remained in the square. Dargan understood the battle before his men did. He looked past Goran at Kale. "You planned your own streets against me." Kale's head throbbed. "I planned them badly years ago. Today I am getting value from the mistake." Dargan barked a surprised laugh. Then he attacked Gorun again. This time, the old orc had a short sword. Dargan took a spear thrust through the outer thigh to reach him. He slammed a shield bearer aside and caught Goran across the ribs with one forearm. Goran hit the ground. Pel, the small goblin guard from the wall, jumped in front of him. Dargan could have killed him with one strike. Pel knew it. He stayed. Dargan raised a fallen axe. Gorun caught the back of Pel's armor and yanked him down. The axe passed over both of them. 3 spears struck Dargan at once. One glanced from armor. One entered his upper arm. The third drove into the gap behind his knee. Dargan went down on one leg. Goran rose with obvious pain, took Pel's spear, and put the point against the war chief's throat. Enough. Dargan looked around. His remaining fighters had stopped. Beyond the block street, horns sounded from the eastern district. The horn pattern belonged to Rusk. He had led a sortie through the breach and reached the enemy rear. At the same time, word spread through Dargan's army that their supply wagons were gone and the war chief had been cut off inside. Units began retreating. Dargan looked at Kale again. "If I surrender, what happens?" Kale answered honestly. "You stand trial for the villages you stripped and the people killed in this siege. Your soldiers who lay down weapons go home. Any village that chooses to join Hearthvale can. Any that does not can remain independent. You will let them leave? I do not need another rebellion next spring." Dargan's mouth twisted. Still counting grain in the middle of a war. The war chief dropped the axe. The siege ended before sunset. Dargan's army still existed outside the walls, but its reason to keep fighting collapsed. Their commander was captive. Their food route was broken. The walls had already cost them hundreds of casualties, and every additional hour promised more. Goran sent riders under truce banners with Dargan's order to withdraw. Most obeyed. Several groups simply went home before receiving it. By night, enemy fires were moving south. The town was still standing. Victory did not make the next morning pleasant. Hearthvale had 68 dead by the final count. Nearly 200 people required treatment. The Eastern District had lost 30 homes. 2 workshops were burned. The southern gate needed complete replacement. Part of the northern wall leaned outward, where an ogre had damaged the footing. The streets smelled of wet ash, blood, boiled bandages, and Boro's emergency porridge. Kale spent the first day doing almost nothing that looked like victory. He approved burial ground expansion. He signed grain releases for families with injured workers. He sent teams to search the abandoned enemy camp for usable food and medical supplies. He ordered Dargan's wounded treated after Hearthvale's own critical cases. Miri objected to exactly one thing. "You are bleeding on the casualty ledger." Kale touched the bandage around his head. "It stopped hours ago." She pointed at a small red mark on the page. "Then explain that." He moved his hand away from the ledger. "I will stand farther back." Excellent administrative decision. Dargan's trial began a week later. Kale refused to decide the sentence alone. Representatives came from 6 villages that had paid the war chief tribute. Rusk testified about orders to strip winter grain from Longroot and 2 smaller communities. Families described labor drafts that had taken adults away during harvest. Dargan admitted most of it. He did not apologize. "I kept the border strong," he said from behind the iron-barred partition in the meeting hall. "My warriors ate because villages paid. Villages survived because raiders feared my warriors. Some people suffered. More would have suffered without me." Kale believed Dargan believed it. That made the conflict clearer, not easier. Dargan had built a system around personal force. It worked until someone created a better alternative. The council sentenced him to permanent confinement rather than execution. Hearthvale converted a stone guardhouse into a permanent detention building, assigned rotating guards, and Kale used a 2-point civic upgrade only after the facility was fully staffed and functional. The reinforced bars seated deeper into the masonry. The hinges became harder to reach from inside, and the doorframe tightened around a lock designed by Nib. Current territory points: 3. His surviving captains were allowed to return home after swearing to respect the new borders. Several did. Several asked to join Hearthvale instead. Dargan laughed when he heard the decision. "You should kill me." Kale stood outside the cell. "Why?" "Because that is what I would do." "That is one reason not to." Dargan sat back against the stone wall. "You think a prison proves you are civilized." "No, Nib thinks it proves he can build a door you cannot break." From the corridor, Nib shouted, "He has tried twice." Dargan looked at the reinforced door with professional irritation. "The hinge is too thick." Nib appeared around the corner, wearing his copper goggles. "Thank you." 3 days later, Gorun and Rusk rode south with 70 guards to secure Dargan's hill stronghold. The garrison had fewer than 60 people left, many of them wounded soldiers, servants, or clerks. Its commander saw Dargan's sealed trial record, heard that the field army had dispersed, and negotiated safe conduct rather than fight a pointless siege. Hearthvale took the stronghold without a battle. The inventory mattered. The armory contained usable weapons and spare armor. The tax sellers held grain and salt collected before the war. An older stone vault, marked with the Ashtide symbol, contained ore bars, sealed alcohol, and decades of records. Dargan had never kept a full dragon payment sitting untouched for 30 years. Perishable goods had been rotated through his stores, while the vault preserved enough reserve and documentation to assemble a tithe quickly if Veros ever woke. Miri had the records packed first. Rusk watched her carry 3 ledgers out of the old treasury. "You know there is silver in the next room." "I know exactly how much," she said. "Paper tells me who will arrive later, asking for it." The first political change came before the wall was repaired. Longroot sent 20 carts of grain and a delegation. Its village head, an older wolf-beast woman named Hessa, stood before Kale in the damaged meeting hall and placed a wooden staff on the table. "Dargan is finished. We need to know who protects the road now." Kale glanced at Gorun. "We do." "Then what do you charge?" Miri opened a ledger. Hessa looked alarmed. Kale nearly smiled. The agreement was simple. Longroot kept its local leadership and land. It paid 1/10 of its measured harvest after seed grain was set aside, plus 1/20 of recorded market sales. In exchange, Hearthvale maintained the road, patrols, way stations, and military response. The rates were fixed for a full harvest year and could not change in the middle of the season without the village's consent, except during a declared emergency. Miri insisted on that last clause. Dargan's collectors had once changed the toll on her old trading post after caravans were already committed to the road. The post failed within a month. She had no intention of building the same trap with cleaner handwriting. Her estimate was equally practical. At normal harvests, one village's contribution could cover its share of road crews, a small patrol rotation, and way station stores. 5 villages together could support the border network. Major construction would still depend on iron exports and Hearthvale's own taxes. Hessa read the terms twice. "That is all?" Miri tapped the page. Late payment penalties are on the back. Hessa turned it over. There it is. 3 more villages signed similar agreements within a month. 2 chose independence instead. Kale let them. That surprised everyone almost as much as his first refusal of tribute. Goran understood the reason. If we force them, we become Dargan with better roads. Exactly. The villages that stayed independent still traded with Hearthvale. One joined voluntarily before winter after discovering that hiring separate guards for every caravan cost more than the tax it had refused. The state grew through boring agreements, repaired bridges, and predictable rules. Kale enjoyed that more than he expected. The system recognized the transition after the 5th village joined the road network, and all major routes maintained regular patrols. Multiple settlements under unified administration, sustained taxation, defense, transport, storage, and law functions detected. Territory classification advanced. City-state. New civic scale available. Territory points gained, 20. Current territory points, 23. Kale read the message twice. The classification simply put a name to what roads, taxes, patrols, storage, and law had already created. The council argued about a formal name for 3 evenings. Nib again suggested Nibopolis, this time as the national capital. Miri threatened to reduce his workshop budget. He withdrew the proposal. In the end, they kept the name everyone already used, Hearthvale. Kale refused the title of king. Miri asked what title he wanted. He shrugged. Kale works. Foreign envoys are not going to write Dear Kale on treaties. Why not? Because I will not allow it. After several minutes of argument, they settled on First Steward of Hearthvale. It sounded important enough for diplomacy and practical enough that Kale could tolerate hearing it. Gorun became Marshal. Sarah became Warden of Roads and Scouts. Nib accepted Master Builder after discovering that the title came with authority to reject unsafe private construction. Miri became Treasurer and immediately demanded a second office because people kept waiting in her doorway. Boro rejected every formal title offered to him. I cook. Miri wrote Chief Provisioner on the payroll anyway. He complained until he saw the salary increase. Rebuilding lasted through autumn and winter. The town changed more after the siege than it had during the previous 6 months. The collapsed eastern wall became a stone-faced earth rampart rather than another tall timberline. Nib insisted on drainage trenches large enough that he could crawl through them for inspection. Kale asked whether that was a measurement standard. It is now. The southern gatehouse gained 2 heavy bolt throwers based on the ballista that had stopped Dargan's ogre. Hadrick improved the iron fittings. Nib redesigned the frame so crews could reload behind cover. Sarah developed range markers on the approaches, so gunners did not have to guess distance under pressure. They built more because large monsters remained a normal threat in the region. Nobody called them dragon weapons. Kale remembered the melted rock at Blackfane anyway. He also remembered how close the town had come to burning during Dargan's siege. Stone firebreaks divided the new districts. Every major square received a covered water cistern. Roof regulations limited untreated dry thatch in the center. Workshops with furnaces moved behind stone partition walls. Residents complained until the first bakery chimney fire failed to spread beyond one roof. After that, complaints became quieter. Spring returned almost 18 months after Kale had woken in the prison wagon. Hearthvale's population had passed 5,000 across the city and dependent settlements. The growth was large, but traceable. 5 former Dargan villages joined with their existing populations. Refugees moved in from poorer border regions. Blackvein attracted miners and smiths. Reed Cross merchants opened permanent warehouses near the northern gate. New farms filled the valley floor. Kale remained physically unimpressive. Good food had filled his face and shoulders slightly. He had learned to use a crossbow well enough to hit a stationary target and a moving target if the moving target was cooperative. Gorun had insisted on basic knife training. A healthy adult orc could still lift Kale with one arm. Boro demonstrated this accidentally when Kale stood in front of the pantry door during a kitchen emergency. The orc placed both hands under Kale's arms, moved him 3 feet to the left, opened the door, and only then realized what he had done. They stared at each other. Boro slowly set down the flour sack he had come for. Sorry. Kale straightened his coat. I would complain, but that was efficient. The city had become strong around a ruler who still needed help moving furniture. Kale had stopped apologizing for the difference months ago. Veros woke on the first hot day of spring. Hearthvale learned because every bird on the eastern ridge left at once. Sarah saw the sky turn black with wings from the watchtower and sent a rider to Kale before anyone knew why. An hour later, shepherds from the eastern farms arrived at the gate with the answer. They had seen something enormous circling Blackvein. By noon, the mine signal tower displayed the emergency flag reserved for creatures too large to classify by normal threat codes. Rusk stood beside Kale on the eastern wall. His face had lost color beneath the red skin. Veros. Kale looked at the distant ridge. You are certain? I saw him when I was a child. Once. My father made everyone lie face down until the shadow passed. Gurun had joined them. If he woke hungry, we should bring livestock inside. Sarah shook her head. He circled the mine, then went south. He did not hunt. Rusk gave a humorless laugh. Then he is checking his property. The old Ash Tith records still existed in Dargim's captured stronghold. Mary had transferred them into Hearthvale's archives because she transferred every piece of paper that might one day involve money. They found the last payment recorded 32 years earlier. 8 wagon loads of iron, 400 sacks of grain, 60 cattle, 20 barrels of strong alcohol. Nib read the final item. That dragon drinks? Gurun said. Apparently. Boro leaned over the ledger. Miri closed the book before he could develop expensive ideas. The payment had been enormous for the old border villages. For Hearthvale, it was possible. That was exactly why Kale refused it. If Veros could demand that much whenever he woke, Hearthvale did not own Blackvein, the farms, or the road. It was merely managing them until a dragon wanted something. The council met that evening. Nobody suggested fighting the dragon as a first choice. Kale appreciated that. We offered trade, he said. Iron at a fixed price, grain if we have surplus, alcohol if Boro stops looking excited. Boro looked less excited. Gorun asked the harder question. If he refuses? Kale looked at Nib. How many heavy throwers are operational? 9 on the city wall. 4 smaller engines at Blackvein. Can they hurt a dragon? Nib looked at Gorun. Gorun looked at Rusk. Rusk rubbed both hands over his face. Nobody who asked that question close to Veros was measuring afterward. Hadrick, the old smith, spoke from the end of the table. They can hurt anything with flesh between armor. Eye, mouth, joint. The problem is hitting it. Sarah tapped the map. Then we do not shoot until he is close. Kale nodded. Their goal was deterrence. Every preparation aimed to make an attack on Hearthvale more expensive than negotiation. They prepared for 4 days. Livestock moved away from exposed eastern farms. Non-combatants in the outer districts received evacuation routes. Cisterns were filled. Roof crews soaked vulnerable timber near the walls. Smiths inspected every ballista fitting. Extra bolts were distributed to towers. Sarah placed range flags and observers outside the wall, then withdrew them before the dragon arrived. Kale ordered that nobody fire first. That mattered. If Veros came to talk, Hearthvale would talk. On the 5th morning, a shadow crossed the city. Every conversation in the market stopped. Kale looked up from the eastern gatehouse. Veros was larger than the prison wagon that had brought him to the valley. Much larger. His body stretched almost the length of Hearthvale's old central square. Bronze-black scales covered him from snout to tail, catching sunlight along their edges. 2 swept horns rose from his skull, the left one chipped near the point. His wing membranes were dark red. His eyes were a pale blue-white that remained visible even at a distance. He circled once. People on the walls held position. Kale heard one ballista crewman breathing too fast behind him. Goran walked over and put a hand on the man's shoulder. The breathing slowed. Veros circled again, lower. His head turned as he studied the walls, roads, stone districts, market roofs, and watchtowers. Then he landed outside the eastern approach. The ground shook. Kale had understood intellectually that a dragon was stronger than him. Seeing one made the comparison absurd. Varos could crush him beneath one claw without noticing. The dragon lowered his head until one enormous pale eye focused on the gatehouse. His voice carried across the field. "Who holds the Valley of Ash Ridge?" Kale stepped onto the outer platform. "Hearthvale." The eye narrowed. "I asked who." "Kale Varen, first steward." Varos's nostrils widened. "Human." The word sounded less like an insult than a surprising inventory result. "Yes." "Come down." Gorun immediately said, "No." Kale almost agreed. He considered the distance, Varos's posture, and the fact that a dragon who intended to kill him could probably damage the gatehouse whether he stood on it or behind it. "I will go to the outer marker." Gorun's jaw tightened. Kale added, "With you." "Better." They left through the small postern gate with Sarah, Rusk, and 12 guards. Kale stopped at the stone negotiation marker, 80 paces from the wall, still within supporting range of the nearest towers. Varos approached until his head alone seemed as large as the guard formation. "For 30 years, Blackvein was quiet," Varos said. "Then your miners began hammering beneath Ash Ridge. Stone carries sound. Your furnaces carried the smell farther. I woke to find carts moving through land that once paid me." He lowered his head. "This valley owed me tithe before your grandparents had names." Kale did not explain reincarnation. The previous ruler is gone. The land remains. The people who work it remain too. Varos's gaze shifted to Gorun. "Orc, tell your human that tradition is older than his walls." Gorun answered, "He knows." "And still refuses?" Kale raised the folded trade proposal in his hand. "I will buy protection if you provide a service. I will trade iron, grain, tools, or alcohol at agreed prices. I will not pay tribute for the right to exist." For several seconds, Varos said nothing. Then smoke curled between his teeth. Rusk whispered, "That went badly." Varos lifted his head. "You have mistaken stone and busy roads for strength." Kale's mouth had gone dry. "Maybe." The dragon spread his wings. "Then learn," Kale shouted one word. Inside, the group ran for the gate. Varos launched into the air behind them. The first attack was deliberately restrained. Kale realized that later. At the time, dragonfire looked like the end of the world. Varos crossed the eastern wall from north to south and released a stream of white-orange flame at the outer rampart. Stone flashed red. Timber railings caught immediately. A watch roof erupted. The heat struck Kale, even behind the gatehouse wall, hot enough to make his eyes water. The fire did not reach deep into the city. That was the first surprise. The new Eastern District had wide stone roads and separated roofs. Flames climbed one barracks building, then met an empty strip instead of another wall of dry structures. Water crews moved before Varos completed his turn. Pumps drew from covered cisterns. Bucket teams soaked adjacent roofs. Fire wardens cut loose one burning awning and dragged it into the street. Nobody had invented dragon-proof water. They had simply spent a year planning how not to lose an entire city to one fire. Varos banked for a second pass. Kale reached the command room under the gatehouse. Sarah was already there. He is staying low when he breathes. Range? Inside the red flags. Kale looked at the crews through the firing slit. Hold until the third marker. He will breathe before that. I know. If we shoot early and miss, he learns our range while loaded weapons are empty. The crewmen swallowed and faced forward. Varos came in lower. The dragon opened his mouth. Now, 4 heavy ballistas fired from the eastern wall. The engines released with deep wooden cracks. The first bolt passed below Varos. The second struck scales on his chest and shattered. The third missed behind him. The fourth hit the lower edge of his right wing. The iron head punched through membrane and tore a narrow line before the shaft spun away. Varos's fire stream shifted. Instead of striking the wall squarely, it crossed the outer ditch and scorched empty earth. The dragon climbed sharply. A sound came from him that Kale felt through the stone floor. The sound carried anger more than pain. "Reload," Kale said. The crews moved. Their training against large beasts had drilled the loading sequence into muscle memory. They released the tension, winched the arms down, fitted fresh bolts, locked the mechanisms, and raised their aim. Veros climbed beyond practical range. For several seconds, Kale thought the demonstration had ended. Then the dragon folded his wings and dived. Sarah's ears flattened against her hair. He is coming for the gatehouse. Kale felt every instinct tell him to leave. This time, leaving was correct. Secondary command, move. Kale ran down the rear stairs with Sarah, while the ballista crews stayed under Goran's command. Remaining in a tower Veros had chosen as a target would only remove Hearthvale's command structure for no gain. Veros came straight at the central tower. Goran waited until the dragon entered the marked lane. Loose. 3 ballistas fired. Veros rolled in the air. 2 bolts missed. The third scraped across the scales beside his neck and broke apart. Then, his fire hit. The upper wooden roof of the gatehouse vanished in flame. 1 ballista crew did not clear fast enough. A defender named Mar was struck by falling burning timber and died before healers reached him. 2 others suffered severe burns. The stone lower level held. Veros pulled up over the city. The cost of the exchange became real to both sides. Hearthvale could hurt him. He could kill people whenever he came close enough to be hurt. Kale reached the secondary command room in the stone market hall. Miri stood there, with emergency ledgers and 3 runners. She looked at the bandage kit in Kale's hand. Not mine. Improvement. Sarah climbed to the roof observer position. Veros was circling higher now. He is looking at the towers. Kale understood what the dragon had learned. The fixed defenses were dangerous only if he entered their arcs. Veros did not have to. He could fly beyond range, choose a farm, destroy it, move to another, and force Hearthvale to bleed slowly. The city could not chase a dragon through the sky. Deterrence required more than 1 clipped wing. Kale looked at the territory map. Blackvein had 4 smaller bolt throwers. The southern road had 2 fortified stations. The western quarry had 1 signal tower, but no heavy engine. They could not cover every farm. If Veros chose a long campaign, Hearthvale would suffer badly. Why would he choose that campaign? Tradition. Reputation. Tradition, reputation, and tribute could justify punishment. But months of costly attacks offered Veros little, unless Hearthvale's refusal threatened his authority over every other ruler nearby. Kale needed to give the dragon a way to stop, while keeping that authority intact. "White flags at the outer marker," Kale said. Miri looked up. "Negotiation?" "Yes." Sarah came down from the roof. "He may read it as surrender." Let him come close enough to hear the difference. The white flags went out. Veros circled twice. Then he landed far beyond ballista range. His right wing membrane leaked a thin line of dark blood where the bolt had torn it. Kale walked out again. Goran came with him despite a burn across 1 forearm from the gatehouse attack. Sarah and Rusk followed. This time, they stopped much farther from the dragon. Veros's voice was colder. "Have you learned?" Kale looked back at the smoke rising from the eastern wall. "Yes." The dragon's eye narrowed. Kale continued. "If we fight seriously, you can destroy towns faster than we can stop you. We can injure you every time you come close. Both facts are now proven." Veros lowered his head. "You speak as though those facts are equal. They are not. We lose more." Goran glanced at Kale, but said nothing. "Then kneel," Veros said. "No." Smoke curled from the dragon's nostrils again. Kale kept talking before the situation became another fire attack. "You want the ash tithe because every ruler before me paid it. If you leave after I refuse, other rulers may think you became weak." Veros's pupils narrowed to thin lines. Rusk quietly moved 1 step farther from Kale. Kale went on. "So do not leave after a refusal. Leave after an agreement." He held up the trade document again. "Hearthvale recognizes the Ash Ridge hunting boundary east of Blackvein. We will not settle beyond it without negotiation." We sell you iron, grain, and alcohol at preferred rates. We provide warning if another dragon crosses the valley toward your territory. In return, you recognize Hearthvale's borders and do not take property, livestock, or people without purchase. Veros stared at him. You offer me the right to buy what was once given. I offer you a permanent supplier that grows richer every year. Burn it, and you get ash. Tax it too heavily, and you get less next year. Trade with it, and you get more without wasting your time. That part interested the dragon. Kale saw the change in the angle of his head. Veros was ancient, powerful, and proud. He was not stupid. And if I refuse? Kale looked at the tear in the dragon's wing. Then you win eventually. You also spend weeks or months attacking stone walls, mines, roads, and villages, while every tower crew learns where to aim. You may lose an eye. You may damage a wing badly enough that another dragon notices. Veros' expression became dangerous. Kale's heart hammered, but he finished. That seems expensive for grain you could buy. Silence stretched across the field. Then Veros did something Kale had not expected. The dragon laughed. It sounded like boulders moving in a deep cave. You are very small. Kale looked down at himself. That has been mentioned. And you built all of this because larger creatures would not leave you alone? More or less. Veros looked past him, at Hearthvale, at the damaged gatehouse, at the smoke-controlled inside stone firebreaks, at the crews already moving replacement timbers, at the ballistas, tracking him even under a negotiation flag. Preferred rates, the dragon said. How preferred? Miri had prepared for this. Kale named the number. Veros immediately demanded half. Kale countered. The dragon threatened to eat their cattle. Kale pointed out that dead cattle did not reproduce. The negotiation lasted longer than the battle. Gorun stood beside Kale the entire time with an expression of deep patience. Rusk looked progressively more stunned as the ancient terror of Ash Ridge argued over barrel prices. They settled on a treaty before sunset. Veros received priority access to specified quantities of iron, grain, and alcohol at reduced but profitable prices. Payment could be made in coin, weighed silver or gold, or gemstones valued by Hearthvale's appointed appraisers. Hearthvale recognized his traditional nesting and hunting territory beyond the eastern ridge. Veros recognized Hearthvale's controlled borders and agreed not to take people, livestock, or goods without compensation. There was one additional clause. If another dragon attempted to claim the old ash tithe from Hearthvale, Veros would clarify that the territory was already under treaty. Miri would later call that the most valuable sentence in the document. Veros pressed one claw into a copper plate to mark the agreement. Then he looked at Kale. If your city fires on me without cause, I burn the towers first. If you cheat the weights on my iron, I burn the scale house. Kale glanced toward the gate where Miri stood, watching. Our treasurer would probably help you. Veros followed his gaze. Miri adjusted her spectacles. The dragon seemed to decide he believed him. He launched into the air at dusk and flew east. Hearthvale's people did not cheer until his shadow disappeared over the ridge. Then the sound rolled through the city from wall to wall. Kale leaned against the stone marker and discovered his legs were trembling. Gorun noticed. You hid that well. I was busy. Rusk looked at the sky. I watched my father bow to that dragon. Dargan kept a tribute reserve and the old records ready for 30 years because he was afraid Veros might wake. Kale rubbed both hands over his face. I am also afraid of him. Rusk looked at Kale. You argued over the price of beer. Fear and accounting can happen at the same time. From behind them, Miri shouted, It was not beer. It was aged grain spirit. There is a tax difference. Gorun laughed until his burned arm hurt. The treaty changed Hearthvale faster than the siege victory had. Merchants arrived, simply to see the copper plate marked by a dragon's claw. Neighboring villages that had remained independent requested defense agreements. Black Vein doubled its guarded shifts because Veros became a regular customer for iron bars, although nobody understood what a dragon intended to do with several tons of metal. Boro solved the alcohol problem by partnering with 3 brewers. The first time Veros collected his order, he complained that 1 barrel was too sweet. Miri deducted the barrel from the invoice and charged him for the other 19. Veros paid with 2 old silver bars and a pouch of raw garnets from his hoard. Miri weighed the silver, had the stones checked by 2 independent merchants, and issued a receipt. Nobody in Hearthvale breathed normally until the transaction was complete. A month later, word traveled farther than the border region. It reached places Kale had never heard of. It also reached other dragons. High in the basalt peaks east of Ash Ridge, Veros landed on a black stone shelf before 2 members of his kind. One was a long silver dragon named Elthara. The other, smaller but heavily scarred, had red scales dark enough to resemble old blood. Elthara noticed a healed tear in Veros's wing. Mortals? Veros folded the wing carefully. A city. The red dragon gave a low, amused rumble. A city did that? A city that expected fire. That ended the amusement. Veros placed a copied mapstone on the basalt between them. Hearthvale's territory was marked along the western valley. They have heavy throwers, disciplined crews, layered fire control, protected stores, and a ruler who understands the cost of conflict. The red dragon asked whether the ruler was a mage. Human. Elthara tilted her head. A strong one? Veros looked at the map. I could break him with 1 claw. Then why is there a treaty? Veros touched the scar in his wing membrane with the tip of 1 claw. Because I would have to reach him first. The dragons discussed the valley for nearly an hour. When they finished, Elthara added a red mark beside Hearthvale on the route stones used by their brood. The mark had a simple meaning. Armed, mortal state. Do not assault for convenience. A second notation referred disputes to Veros before force was used. Hearthvale had become a place dragons considered before entering. Kale did not know about the mark yet. He had a different crisis. Goran had broken the new council chair. The chair had been built for Kale. Gorun had entered the hall before a meeting, seen an empty seat near the table, and sat down without thinking. There was a sharp crack. The old orc ended up on the floor holding both armrests. Everyone went silent. Nib arrived at the sound. His gaze moved from the broken chair to Gorun. His copper goggles slowly descended over his eyes. I made you an orc chair. Gorun remained on the floor. This one was closer. I labeled them. I do not read your handwriting. It says Kale. That is why I did not read it. Kale sat at the table and covered his face with 1 hand. Miri opened the furniture budget. I am charging the marshal personally. Gorun finally looked concerned. Rebuilding the chair cost less than repairing the eastern gatehouse. Miri acted as if the opposite were true. By summer, Hearthvale no longer resembled the dumping ground where the prison wagon had left 40 unwanted creatures. A traveler, approaching from the south, saw cultivated fields before the walls. Stone-lined roads connected farming settlements. Signal towers stood on the ridges. The city itself rose behind an earth and stone defensive ring, with timber upperworks, broad gates, and towers carrying heavy bolt throwers. Inside, market streets held goblin workshops beside orc bakeries and ratkin counting houses. Beastfolk hunters sold leather near kobold potters. Black vein iron arrived every morning. Grain moved into dry granaries large enough to feed the population through winter. The original upgraded hut still existed. Nib refused to demolish it. He had reinforced the foundation, replaced the roof twice, and turned it into a small public office near the old well. Kale visited one evening after a council meeting. Rain had started, light and warm compared with the storm of his first night. He stood under the eave and watched people cross the square. Gurren joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. You are staring at a wall. I slept against that wall. You slept under my head. Kale took the tea. My leg remembers. Goran looked toward the city. The old orc had more gray in his hair now. His knee still hurt. He no longer carried a spear, unless he expected trouble. A marshal had people for that. though he complained the title made him sound older. 5,000, he said. Miri says 5,312. Of course she does. They drank in silence for a moment. A messenger ran across the square toward them. Kale knew from the speed that the evening was over. The messenger stopped, caught his breath, and handed him a sealed envelope. The wax bore a symbol Kale did not recognize, a golden sun behind a scaled crown. Gorun did. His expression changed. Sun-scale dominion. Kale looked at him. How far east? Large. Older than Dargan's entire bloodline. The messenger had 2 more letters, one from a northern beast kingdom requesting formal trade talks, one from 3 western towns asking about admission to Hearthvale. The northern trade offer and the western towns were opportunities. The sun-scale letter was a claim. It announced that an imperial envoy was already traveling toward the valley to discuss borders, mineral rights, and Hearthvale's recent treaty with Veros. Kale unfolded a map on the old hut's table. Hearthvale occupied a small patch of the page. The sun-scale dominion filled most of the east. Beyond it were regions he knew only by names. Demon principalities, giant clans, river cities, the Dragon Peaks, lands whose trade routes did not yet touch Hearthvale. 18 months ago, Kale's entire political problem had been whether a young orc would take the grain sack before everyone else ate. Now an empire wanted to discuss mineral rights. Nib entered the hut, carrying a stack of building requests. Why are you both looking unhappy? Kale handed him the sun-scale letter. Nib read the seal, not the text. That is expensive wax. Miri arrived behind him, as if summoned by financial language. Who is spending expensive wax? Kale gave her the letter. She read it quickly. The envoy arrives in 12 days. Goran grunted. We should prepare the guard. Sarah entered through the other door after hearing the word envoy from outside. I will check the eastern road. Nib raised to the construction requests. Do I finish the west market first? Boro appeared at the window because someone had told him important guests were coming. How many people in the envoy? Kale looked at him. Why? Food. Miri began listing diplomatic expenses. Nib argued that the guest house needed another floor. Goran said an empire did not care about the guest house if the guards looked weak. Sarah said an empire cared about both if it intended to spy on them. Boro wanted to know whether lizard folk ate spicy food. Kale stood in the original hut while his government argued around him. Through the open door, the city continued working. A wagon of iron passed the well. Children chased one another between market stalls. A watch bell sounded the end of the evening shift. Far above the eastern ridge, something large moved through the clouds, then turned away from Hearthvale's airspace and continued north. Kale tapped the map. They arrive in 12 days. We have time. Everyone stopped talking. He looked at Boro first. Feed them well. Boro nodded. Goran, normal security. Do not line the road with soldiers. It looks frightened. The marshal grunted but agreed. Sarah, learn everything you can about their route before they arrive. Nib, finish the guest house we already have before inventing a second floor. Miri, prepare trade numbers and find out what mineral rights they think they are discussing. Miri's whiskers twitched. And you? Kale looked at the huge Eastern Empire on the map, then at the small state around Hearthvale. I am going to find out whether they came to trade or threaten us. Nib raised one finger. What if it is both? Kale folded the map. Then we charge them for lunch before they start threatening. Boro approved immediately. Outside, rain tapped against the upgraded roof that had once been crooked, leaking, and barely large enough for 40 desperate exiles. By dawn, Sarah already had riders checking the eastern road. Boro was ordering extra flour for the delegation, and Miri had added 3 new columns to the trade ledger. Hearthvale had 12 days to receive its first imperial envoy.